My sister is 2 years younger than me. When we were growing up, she always had her head in a book or was writing something in one of her journals. She liked school and did well there, and she loved the library. It was her second favorite place in the world after home. I was the opposite. The only thing that I ever read was the back of a cereal pack, the TV guide, and the occasional comic book about mutants or zombies or other gross monsters. School was the most boring thing that had ever been invented, and the highlight of the day was when the bell went and I could get out of the place. And I loved being outside. I used to race with my friends through our neighborhood on our bikes or start a game of baseball on a patch of waste ground that would only end when it went dark. The woods just outside of town were another favorite haunt of mine, and in the summer, the river which ran along one edge of the woods was perfect for swimming, or for playing water baseball, which was an invention of mine. As I pedaled and ran and laughed my way through life, I collected cuts and scrapes like my sister collected A+ grades on her schoolwork. I also used to like winding my sister up. Trying to sneak a peek at her journals was a classic. When she caught me trying, which I always made sure that she did, she would turn very red in the face and yell that she hated me. A while later, I would knock on her bedroom door and say how sorry I was, and then ask her if she could help me with my homework. And the amazing thing was, she always did. As we got older and hit our teens, my sister isolated herself even more while I continued to treat life as a game. One evening, I was brought home by the police. A neighbor's window had been broken, which was a total accident. Honestly, it was. After the cops had left, my parents went ballistic with me. I remember one of the things my mom said to me was, "Why can't you be more like your sister?" What, sit in my room all the time brooding? I thought, but didn't risk saying it out loud. I was grounded for a week and sent up to my room with no supper, both of which were a total nightmare. Hours later, I was still pacing my room and thinking up new ways to break out, when there was a quiet tap on the door. I opened it to find my sister standing there with a slice of pizza on a napkin. She handed it over without a word and headed along to her room. I don't know if there's a world speed record for eating a cold slice of pepperoni pizza, but I reckon that I might have beaten it that night. A couple of months after this, when I was still pretty much out on parole as far as my parents were concerned, I was running for the exit at the end of another endless school day when I saw my sister. She was standing by the lockers and a couple of older boys had her backpack. They were going through it and pulling things out and then waving them in my sister's face and laughing. One of them had my sister's latest journal. Through her tears, she was telling them to leave her alone. I saw red. I raced along the corridor, my hands clenched into fists, and I barreled into the boys who were tormenting her. The three of us rolled along the floor in a tangle of punches and kicks and shouting. I managed to elbow one of them in the gut, which left him gasping for breath, and landed a fist right into the nose of the other one. He yelped as blood began to pour out of his nostrils. Seconds later, a bunch of teachers arrived and pulled us apart. As I was marched off to the principal's office, I glanced around and saw my sister retrieving her journal from the floor where it had fallen. She looked up at me and smiled. That smile made the trouble that I got into for brawling worth it. Eventually, the time came for me to leave school. I got a job in a local auto repair shop, which was good for a while. But as another summer drifted into fall, I started to get more and more restless. There was nothing for me in my hometown, and I made the decision that I wanted out. And my route was clear. I joined the army. One beautiful spring morning, I was packing my bag and getting ready to head off to catch the bus that would take me to basic training. Before I left though, my mom had insisted that I eat a proper breakfast. As I took my seat at the table, I could tell that my mom had been crying, but was doing her best to act as if everything was fine. My dad was subdued. There was no sign of my sister. She had been accepted onto a degree in archaeology and would be studying at a university close enough for her to stay living at home. I understood well enough to know why she wouldn't want to move away. All that socializing with new people would have been too much for her. But that was no excuse for her to miss my farewell breakfast. After I cleared my plate, I told my parents that I was going up to my sister's room to tell her that she could at least wave goodbye. My dad stopped me. He put a hand on my shoulder and explained that my sister did not want me to go, that she would miss me and was worried about me. That threw me. She hadn't said anything to me, which wasn't really that surprising considering that we hardly ever spoke. But still. My dad put a smile on his face and told me that she'd come around eventually and would give me a warm welcome when I came back home for my first leave. He was sure of it. And then he pointed out that I would be late for the bus if I didn't get a move on. I grabbed my bag, shook his hand, and gave my mom a kiss on the cheek. And that was me. I was out the door, on my way to a new and exciting life. One that began in a swirl of early morning starts, runs, drills, salutes, rules to learn, boots to clean, and then falling into bed before starting all over again after never enough sleep. I had bags under my eyes and blisters on my feet, and I was in my element. After basic training came the graduation ceremony. My parents attended. My sister stayed home, which I had been expecting but still felt a flare of disappointment about. And then I was posted to a base in the Midwest to start the next phase of my life in the Army. I had been primed for action and adrenaline and being pushed to my limits. What I got was routine and drills. Boredom set in. I tried to test myself. I used my periods of leave to go free climbing and free diving rather than going home to visit my parents. I could tell they were disappointed about this when I spoke to them, but being back in my hometown was the last thing that I wanted to do. I also tried speaking to my sister a few times and sent her a bunch of messages, but she kept on blanking me. Back on base, my frustration grew. I had to do something. In the end, I went all or nothing and I applied for the Special Forces. I entered the selection process, a driven man. Failure was not an option. The next few years made everything that I had done in my life up until that point seem like a cakewalk. It was extreme and it was exhilarating, and I made it. I was on a total high until it all came crashing down. The night before my first overseas mission, I was called into the CO's office and told that my parents had been killed in an automobile accident. The CO told me how sorry it was and informed me that I could take compassionate leave. Looking back, I find it hard to explain my actions here. I was torn apart by the news. I loved my mom and dad dearly. But I was also due to fly out and do what I had trained so hard for. I was still young and naive enough to believe that combat was going to be amazing. And a part of me thought that if I left the base that night, I might never get the chance to prove myself in the field of conflict. My mind was racing and I made a quick decision. I told the CO that I wanted to go on the mission. Me going home wouldn't bring my parents back, so I would stay with my comrades. I would do my duty. Although I was not allowed to reveal any details about where I was and what I was doing, I was given permission to contact my sister and tell her what I had decided. I tried, but her phone rang out, as did the phone at our parents' home. I messaged her a bunch in different ways, told her that I would see her as soon as I could. Looking back, I feel very ashamed of what I did, but at the time, I was solely focused on the mission ahead. My heart was beating fast as I walked towards the plane on the runway, which would be taking us to our destination. We would parachute out over a jungle region at midnight local time and undertake disruptive activity behind enemy lines. We were out there for 6 weeks. I lost 2 close friends on the deployment, and I returned to base feeling dog-tired and confused. It was too much to process, so I buried it inside instead and went home to see my sister. Waiting at the airport for the civilian flight home, I searched on news websites local to my hometown and found one small article about the accident. My parents had been driving home from a movie theater when they had been hit by another vehicle that had earlier been reported stolen. The police were still trying to trace the driver of that vehicle, who had fled the scene on foot. I boarded the plane in a daze. I was pulsing with anger and weighed down by sadness at the same time. When I finally walked up to the front door of the home that I had grown up in, I felt at breaking point. All I wanted to do was hug my sister and tell her that I loved her. I no longer had a key, and so I knocked. I could see movement inside, and I caught a glance of my sister, but she was moving away from the door. I didn't understand why. I knocked again and yelled out that it was me. A few moments later, I received a message on my phone. It said that I had broken her heart by not coming home for the funeral, and that she never wanted to see me again. I threw my phone to the ground. This couldn't be happening. I hammered on the door, pleaded with her to let me in. I begged her. If we could only talk and sort things out, it would be okay. I mean, surely it would be okay. After a while, I was dimly aware of a siren. It was coming closer. Turned out I was causing such a disturbance that one of the neighbors had called the cops. I knew one of the officers who arrived. We had been in the same year at school. He told me that he was really sorry about my parents, but it was best that I left. I was devastated. I wanted to argue. I wanted to go over and tell the neighbor exactly what I thought of them. But if I had been arrested and charged my military career, it could have been over. And at that moment in time, I didn't seem to have anything else left. I had lost my parents and my sister, it seemed. I apologized to the 2 officers and I headed back to the airport. That was the last time that I was ever in my hometown. After a lost weekend spent locked in a motel room drinking, I returned to my unit. More missions followed over the next 5 years. They are not in any official records. The bottom line is that these were conflicts where my country was getting its hands dirty, but didn't want the rest of the world to know. As for me, I became collateral damage. There wasn't a defining moment where I broke down and couldn't continue. It was a gradual collapse. I drank in secret, I took pills. My nerves were on a knife edge and sleep became a fractured nightmare-infested thing. I would wake up with a yell and lie there coated in sweat. I knew there would be no point trying to get back to sleep. Now when so many painful memories from the missions were there, ready to twist into another hideous dream. Finally, I accepted that I could not go on, and I opened up about my substance abuse to an army doctor. After a bunch more paperwork, boy does the army like paperwork, I was discharged. Being a civilian again though did not feel good. I still woke up from hideous dreams every night, and I was constantly on edge, looking around for threats that were not there. I also tried reaching out to my sister again, but none of the contacts that I had for her worked. I searched for her online and following the digital thread, found out that she had graduated and was now a faculty member of the archaeological department of a university. I felt a swell of pride about this. My little sister, she had done good. I tried sending messages to her via the general contact details shown on the university website. I wanted her to know that I thought she was amazing and wanted to say sorry one more time. I never heard back from any of the messages. I didn't blame her, I didn't blame anyone, apart from myself. I was feeling lower and lower by this point and I started to drift. I hitched rides and slept rough. I avoided people where I could. It was like I was on the run. There's a saying about no matter how far you travel, you can never get away from yourself. I was the poster boy for that saying at that point in my life. After 6 months or so, I found myself in a rural area in the far north. The solitude that I was able to find there felt good, and so I stayed on. I found a derelict cabin and started to do it up. The nearest town was hours away. I was living off the land to an extent. Once a month, I drove into town and stayed just long enough to stock up. I also cashed my army pension at the post office there. Living like this, I found a kind of peace. I liked the way the periods of light and darkness stretched and constricted through these seasons to create extremes. I enjoyed the long days and the nights that held the grip. I loved the silence that was broken only by the wind and the cries of the animals. I could have stayed there forever. But then the policeman knocked on the door and turned my new life upside down. I tensed at the sound of the knock. Nobody had been out to my property all the time that I had lived there, and I wasn't expecting anyone. I went to the window to check who was out there and saw the cap held in his hand, the bulky jacket over his uniform, and the car parked up. There was no reason I shouldn't open my door and wish the officer a civil good morning. So I did. He asked me if I was Jordan Anderson. I answered that I was, and then he looked down at his boots for a moment, and that sent a ripple of unease loose inside of me. I asked him if something was wrong, and he told me in a solemn voice, "It's your sister. She's been reported missing." I told him that he better come in. I offered him coffee, but he said no, so I asked him just to get to it, to tell me what he knew. He looked me in the eye and said, "Your sister's personal file has you down as next of kin and gives your contact details as the Army. When her employer contacted the Army, they passed the message on to the post office in town. The post office called me. You being such a hard man to contact, the message was already 5 days old, and I didn't want to delay things any further, so I drove straight out here. The message said that your sister was working with a group of university students on an archaeological dig at an old mining settlement in a remote area of northern Alaska. They were off-grid as far as mobiles and the net was concerned, but had been in regular contact with the university via satellite phone. Then they fell silent. After a week, there was sufficient concern for their welfare that a local search and rescue team was sent to the settlement, but no one was found there. The authorities are examining the evidence, but as yet, there's no explanation. Maybe there was some kind of accident. It's a dangerous environment up there." His voice trailed off, and I could tell that he didn't want to say out loud what we were both thinking. That my sister was missing, presumed dead. He didn't seem to have anything else to say, so I thanked him and told him that I had work to be getting on with. He told me that he was sorry and that if he received any further word, he'd be sure to let me know. I stood in the front room and listened to the sound of his car driving away, until there was only the silence once more and I was alone with my thoughts. A lot of questions were bubbling up inside all of me at once. Why did she put me down as her next of kin? Did it mean that she wanted me to be a part of her life after all? And did that matter anyway if she was gone? As this last question rose and fell away inside me, I put my head in my hands, and I made a decision. I couldn't. I wouldn't accept that my sister was dead, so I would go to northern Alaska and look for her. With a sense of urgency pulsing through me, I loaded up my truck. The last thing that I got was my mobile phone. I hadn't used it for a long time because I had no signal where I lived, but I figured I needed it then. I turned it on and put it in the passenger seat and then set off. I drove towards town, glancing at regular intervals at the mobile. I was a mile out from the center of town when the bars appeared. I pulled over, opened up the browser, and typed in the name of the university where she worked. Moments later, I was on its homepage. After following a bunch of links, I ended up in the news section. There was a bland, self-promotional story announcing the archaeological dig that my sister was a part of. In the circumstances, it should have been removed, but I guess, like most big organizations, the university's left hand wasn't talking to its right hand and the story was still there. It was dated 3 months before and detailed how a team from the university's archaeological department would be surveying a long-abandoned mining settlement of historical interest. I had always thought that archaeologists only ever dug up sites that were thousands of years old, but according to the website, this project was focused on a settlement that had sprung up around 70 years ago. The site was said to have been left undisturbed and could help add important details to the understanding of an industry which had played such a key role in the region. All of which would have been just dandy had the people carrying out the work there not seemingly vanished from the face of the earth. These supplementary information at the end of the story included a map. It wasn't detailed enough to lead me to the old mining settlement directly, but did show a town that was relatively nearby. That I knew was where I needed to head first. Next, I checked out flights as that should have been the quickest way to get to the area, but that proved to not be the case. I would need to wait 3 days until the next scheduled flight to the nearest regional airport, and then either charter a small plane or hire a car. Waiting for anything was out of the question with the mood that I was in. I decided that I would get there under my own steam in my own vehicle. I restarted the engine, turned away from town, and floored the accelerator. I drove non-stop for hour after hour. I knew that I should have stopped and rested up, but I was possessed. Nothing else mattered now but for me to get there and find my sister. When night fell, I felt as though I was moving through an endless darkness. There was no horizon, just the strip of road ahead of me caught in the headlights. Now and then I caught glimpses of lights in the far distance, the bright clusters of industrial plants shining like constellations on the edge of sight. Hours would pass without me seeing a single other vehicle. Just before dawn, I was looking at the road but not really seeing anything. I was feeling hazy and thinking about my sister and our parents, our home, when an 18-wheeler suddenly appeared. It towered over me, its horn was screaming, and its lights were blinding me. It was about to hit me. There was no time to brake. I pulled the steering wheel to the right as hard as I could, and I felt the force of the other vehicle pass by me like a storm. My truck shook and rattled as it careened off the tarmac onto dirt and rock. I braked and veered to a halt and then sat there breathing raggedly, blinking, wondering how I had not seen it coming. I figured that I must have been falling asleep at the wheel and drifting into the other lane. If we had collided, I would have been crushed. I wiped cold sweat from my brow and drove a little further away from the road, then turned the engine off and closed my eyes. I could not help my sister if I was dead. I needed to sleep. I woke with a start a few hours later. A fragment of a nightmare remained in my mind's eye for a moment. I was parachuting into hostile territory, and the ground was opening up below me. The crevice was lined with sharp teeth. I rubbed my face. It was another foul dream and I needed to forget about it. I made coffee into flavorless powdered stew on the small camper stove that I brought with me. Topped this off with a couple of energy bars and then got going again. As the miles continued to pass, I lost track of time. There was only the road ahead. When finally, I saw a sign with the name of the town that I was looking for. A tired smile that crossed my face. I was one step closer to finding my sister. It was dusk. The road grew narrower as I approached the town. There were no streetlights alongside the road, but I could see the glow of lights and buildings ahead as night fell. Shadows reached out from squat wooden structures that lined what seemed to be the town's main street. Its only street, perhaps. I could just make out the goods in the window of a convenience store. It looked as if it was already closed for the night. On the other side of the road, the lights were going out in another store. A silhouette inside pulled down a shutter over the door. Next door, there was a light on in a building announcing itself as a mortician's. Death must be a 24-hour business around here, I thought with a wiry grin, and drove on slowly down the street. Towards the end of the strip on the left, there was one building which looked very much open. Light bled from its windows into the street, and as I parked up and killed the engine, I could hear music as well as the sound of raised voices drifting out. I climbed from my truck, stretched my aching limbs, and looked at the sign daubed on the window in white paint. It read, Jed's Bar. Underneath was scrawled, Rest your weary bones and take a drink. At that moment in time, that sounded mighty good to me, so I headed on inside. The air was thick with the smell of alcohol and tobacco. I was pretty ripe after long days on the road, but as I stood just inside the doorway, there was no mistaking the stench of stale sweat that also filled the place. I looked around. There were a row of round wooden tables with chairs pulled up around them, a jukebox playing a song about being lonesome in the night, and a long bar area running the length of one wall. The patrons of the bar were gathered there, hunched over glasses and looking my way. A dozen pairs of bloodshot eyes in all. I guessed that they must not have gotten many strangers calling in for a drink at Jed's Bar, but I didn't feel intimidated by the intention. I nodded and said, I hope you're all well this fine evening, and then I headed for the bar. There were no women patronizing the bar that particular night, and I doubted the men there had loving better halves waiting at home. Their clothes looked what I would have called lived in. The stubble on their chins was gray and their cheeks were explosions of broken veins. The man standing behind the bar who was watching me as well as I approached was equally disheveled. He was wiping the inside of a tankard with a filthy cloth. I made a mental note to take my drink directly from a bottle and settled into an empty seat. I ordered a beer. There was a handwritten sign on a chalkboard behind the bar saying, No credit cards, no tabs. I placed a note on the bar and then turned to my neighbor and smiled and told him that I was looking for the old mining settlement and would be mighty grateful if he or one of the other gentlemen in the bar could give me directions. Well, once I had said my piece, it was as if somebody had flicked a switch. The atmosphere in the bar went from wary suspicion of a stranger to downright cold. I had no idea what I had done wrong, and I turned to the barman. He was scowling at me and pretty much slammed the open bottle of beer down onto the bar in front of me, then said in a hoarse and slurred voice, Dang, mister, you don't want to go to that place. There's a badness out there waiting in the darkness. It drove the miners to abandon the settlement, and it hasn't lost its appetite since. We told the other strangers that. We told them to stay away, but they would not listen. He shook his head and went back to wiping a glass with a filthy cloth. None of the men at the bar were looking at me now. It felt like they were averting their gaze. They wanted nothing to do with me. In a quiet voice, I said, "My little sister was one of those strangers, and I'm here to find her and bring her home if I can. If one of you want to help me do that, I'll be grateful. If not, I'll wish you a good night and be on my way." I caught glances between the barman and the men at the bar. I figured they were trying to decide what to do. After a few long minutes, the barman went into a back room and returned carrying a map. It was old and faded and torn to pieces. He opened it up and put it on the bar, and then he placed a nicotine-stained finger on a point on the map. He said nothing. None of them did. They didn't need to. I looked to where the old mining settlement was located, and thanks to my years of army training, I memorized the map. And then I nodded at the barman and left. The doors closed behind me. I stood and breathed in the night air. It was cold and clear. I started up the engine and set off in the direction the map had shown. I had my headlights on full beam. They picked out a dirt track with trees starting to rise around it. I trusted my sense of direction and the guidance offered by these stars, and I knew that I could reach my destination. I hadn't been driving for long though when the route that I was on started to become impassable for my truck. I tried forcing my way through a little further, but the sounds of the scraping and cracking coming from below the truck made me stop. Damaging the truck beyond repair was something that I needed to avoid. I reckoned it was another 3 hours on foot to the mining settlement. That would have been a breeze back in my special forces days, but I was nowhere near that level of fitness now. But I was still in good shape and I was determined. I grabbed a backpack, filled it with enough supplies to keep me going for 24 hours, put on a headband with a flashlight attached, and set off on foot. I wanted to run, but even with the flashlight cutting swaths through the darkness, the danger of snagging my foot in the undergrowth was too risky, so instead I walked as quick as I could. To help ensure that I could find my way back to the truck, I marked trees at regular intervals. I was light on my feet, but to the creatures living there, I must have sounded like a clumsy juggernaut. All around me there were frequent sudden rustles of movement, and animals and birds crying out. As the miles passed, I began to gasp for breath. The cold air burnt the back of my throat, and I began to feel sharp pains spreading through my chest. I powered on, focusing on the next step, and then the next. Every one I took brought me closer to finding my sister. My sense of time slipped, and I couldn't say if there was 3 hours or longer when a break appeared ahead of me. I raced towards it and found myself in a clearing. The first light of dawn was creeping through the sky. I turned off the flashlight. In the gloom, the remains of old timber huts stood scattered around. Time and nature had broken in roofs and rotted away walls, but these were clearly still places where the miners must have lived. The huts were laid out alongside a crude grid, and there was the remnants of a street sign. On one of the points, somebody had carved New York that-a-way. As I looked around, the place felt more like the ghost of a small town than a temporary settlement. Maybe the miners had been planning on staying here. I wondered as I moved forwards, making my way past the huts. Through the openings, I could see that there were still chairs and some of the remains of tables. Looking out over the entire settlement, I could make out the shell of a larger building towards its center. Maybe it had been a meeting place for business, or a chapel, or a bar. Its ramshackle frame could have housed more than 24 people easily, I figured. And then I came up alongside it and my nerves began to tingle. Through the gaping wound of a decayed window frame, I could see 3 large tents pitched inside. They were modern, high-quality kits, and I knew without a shadow of a doubt that this is where my sister and the rest of the archaeological team had been staying. I walked through one of the jagged gaps in the frame of the building and over to the tents. There was no sound coming from inside the tents and no sign of movement, and I was not expecting to find anybody inside them. The search and rescue team would have presumably looked inside the tents while they were doing their sweep of the area and found nothing. But I needed to see inside the tents with my own eyes anyway. There could be a clue in there as to where the missing people had gone. I approached the nearest tent. Its front lay open and there was no external sign of damage. I looked inside cautiously in case any local wildlife had wandered in. Startling something with claws was always a bad idea. There were no animals inside though. The tent was just about tall enough to stand up inside, and there was a long trestle table set up in the middle. Various objects rested on the table. There was a clay pipe that looked darkened by age. There was a small knife that still looked sharp despite the obvious signs that it had been many years since the blade had been used to cut anything. There was a single shoe and a plate with a crack running down one side. All in all, there were dozens of what I would describe as everyday items that must have been collected as part of the archaeological investigation of the site. At the far end of the trestle table, there was a closed laptop and a paper notebook. I opened the laptop and it flickered on. The logo of the university appeared on screen along with a box asking for a password. I turned to the notebook. In page after page of careful handwriting, it detailed objects that I recognized from the table. There were sketches alongside dimensions and notes of locations where each object had been found. It was nerdy to the 9th degree and I imagined my sister loving it. I smiled sadly to myself and went to check out the other tents. The first one was clearly where people bunkered down. It was filled with a tangle of sleeping bags and clothes, wash bags, and bug repellent. I found a couple of wallets as well with IDs in them. Both were men in their early 20s. They must have been students, I guessed, on what must have felt like the adventure of a lifetime. Until what? I was still no closer to finding out. I shook my head and backed out of the tent and entered the last one. From the clothing scattered about, this looked to have been where the women slept. Now was not the time to worry about invading personal space, so I rooted through their belongings, even shaking out sleeping bags in my mounting frustration. In the last sleeping bag that I lifted up, I could feel something still inside it. I reached in and took out a slim paper notebook. A cold chill traveled over my skin. Even before I opened the notebook, I thought that I knew what it was. I turned to the first page and by the daylight streaming through the sides of the tent, I began to read my sister's journal. The entries began as she prepared to leave for this expedition. Through the details of double-checking equipment and finalizing travel plans, her excitement shone through. She was going to lead the expedition, which was a first for her and clearly a proud achievement. At one point, she wrote, "I wish so much that I could pick up the phone and call Mom and Dad and tell them all about this." There was no mention of me. The journal went on to record the journey to northern Alaska, the long hike to get to the settlement carrying their gear and then setting up the camp, and the buzz of the early excavation work. I read this through a blur of tears. I hadn't cried since I was a child. Despite all the pain of my military service and its aftermath, I had kept the tears inside. Sitting in that tent with my sister's journal open on my knee, there was no holding back. The journal ended with an entry about settling down to a good night's sleep. There was nothing about any threat or concerns for her safety or for the students with her. I closed the journal. I felt drained. Without really thinking about what I was doing, I pulled the sleeping bag over me and lay down. Something growled close by. I opened my eyes. My heart was beating fast and it was dark inside the tent. Night had fallen. I breathed out. I must have slept for hours and the growl was a part of another nightmare. I told myself that it was fine. But then I heard another growl. I froze. The sound had come from right outside of the tent. I looked over at the entrance. I hadn't closed it, so whatever was out there had the red carpet pretty much laid out for it to walk on in if he wanted. My mind began to race through possibilities. It hadn't sounded like a bear. Maybe it was a wolf. And one that was hungry enough to come hunting for a human. The growl outside sounded again, a low and harsh rumble, like a storm building before it breaks. I was armed, not because I had come to this place expecting violence, but because it was practical to carry in a landscape such as this. I unclipped the holster and drew nice and slow. I wanted to give whatever was out there the shock of its life. I aimed at the open entrance and fired, and then listened. Apart from my ragged breathing, there was silence. I sat up and then crawled out of the tent. I was relieved to see that there was no wild animal in sight, not only because it meant that I had succeeded in scaring it off, but also because I had not wanted to harm a creature acting naturally in its own home territory. I was the intruder here after all. And as long as I didn't end up as dinner, I figured the two of us could get along at a distance real fine. I did not reholster in case the animal decided to try again and collected twigs one-handed to make a fire. Now the initial danger had passed and I was starting to feel the bitter cold of the night. Once the flames were crackling, I sat as close to them as I could without getting singed. I still fell down after reading my sister's journal, but I was more determined than ever to find her. One wolf, it had been a wolf. It would have not been enough to take and kill a group of adults, which meant that there was still a mystery here. And where there was a mystery, there was hope. I decided that in the morning, I would begin to methodically survey the surrounding area of the settlement. I would work my way outwards, looking for signs of broken foliage or tracks, from people or otherwise that could give me a lead. In the meantime, the best that I could do was remain vigilant in case my wild neighbor returned, and brew up some coffee. 20 minutes or so later, I was sipping my second cup of coffee when I heard a rustle nearby. I put the cup down gently and quietly as I could, and I focused in on the sound. It had come from almost straight ahead of me. And there it was again, the sound of something moving close by but out of sight. I pointed the flashlight and through the gaps in the frame of the building saw the dark shapes of huts, and something darker still padding between them. I got to my feet and slipped the safety catch off. My heart was a jackhammer inside me as I stared out and saw a pair of eyes. They were red and so vivid and bright it was as if they were two scarlet flames in the night. And then I saw the tips of fangs and a snout as a monster began to move towards me. It was a wolf but made grotesquely large. Its pelt was gray and matted. Its stride was slow and deliberate. My guts, as much as my eyes, told me this was an intelligent creature and a vicious one. Lines of drool hung from its fangs as its jaw opened a little. A low growl drifted towards me, and I could see it tensing and getting ready to leap. I did not move. Hold it, I told myself. Hold it. And then the creature exploded forwards. Its claws were extended, its jaws wide open. I raised my weapon and fired. The creature threw its head up and howled and then fell to the ground. It writhed around, thrashing in a frenzy of pain. I could see blood rushing from inside its mouth where I had wounded it. I felt no sense of triumph or relief because the mystery of my sister's disappearance had been explained. A creature of this size could have taken her and the students. Years ago, one of this thing's ancestors could have also killed some of the miners in the settlement and scared the rest of them away. Scholars and miners would have been no match for it. But X Special Forces was a different ballgame altogether. I kept the barrel pointed at the creature. I felt nauseous as I looked at the thing's fangs and wondered if they had been the last thing my sister had seen. My finger twitched. I was going to make sure that it never killed again. Only suddenly, it turned its head to face me. Its eyes burnt into me. It got to its feet, it snarled, and it threw itself at me. I ducked and rolled away. A line of pain shot along my arm. Gasping, now sprawled out on the ground, I looked at my arm. A wide gash ran the length of my forearm, where the creature must have caught me with its claws. And now it was behind me, snarling, ready to attack once more. I took a deep breath. Thankfully, I held the weapon on my uninjured side. I threw myself onto my back, extended my arm, and aimed for the creature's eye. A second later, a primal scream cut through the night. My aim had been true. I had still not put the creature down for good, though. It reared away and began to run back through the settlement. I followed as it sped past the huts and then into the undergrowth beyond. It was time to finish it, to end its filthy life. My flashlight revealed a trail of blood in the creature's wake. It was crashing onward, but there would be no escape. I raced on until I saw ahead of me the creature slow down and then collapse. I slowed as well and circled it. It was lying on the ground, breathing heavily. As I came closer, it looked up at me with its remaining eye. The fire there was dimming. And then the eye closed. It was over. I began to turn away, and then I saw something just past where the creature lay that stopped me in my tracks. I moved towards the thing that I had seen, desperately hoping that I was mistaken, but there was no mistake. A human skull glinted pale and terrible in the beam of my flashlight, and just beyond it there was a second skull. Lying at an angle to this was a spine and a ribcage. I took another few steps forward, and everywhere that I looked, I could see more skeletal remains. Some looked very old, others seemed more recent. I noticed a sliver of flesh still attached to one femur. I had seen things that no person should have to see in the theater of war, but this was more than I could take, because I knew these were the victims of the creature and that my sister would be among them. I fell to my knees and wept. I had failed her, and I wanted to lay down among the dead and never move. I knelt there, racked with guilt and sorrow through the rest of that longest night. At dawn, I forced myself to my feet. The least I could do was give these people as decent as a burial as they could. But where to begin? I was trying to decide when my world was turned upside down once again. In the morning light, something had moved just beyond where the bones lay. I looked closer and I saw a hand. The fingers were twitching, and I could see a tangle of hair as well. By all it was incredible that there was still somebody alive. I scrambled forwards and my heart leapt. It was my sister. She was covered in dirt and dried blood and barely conscious. I checked her pulse and it was weak but steady. "Hold on there," I said to her. "I'm going to get you out of here." I don't know if she heard me, but that didn't matter at that moment. All that did was that somehow she had survived and I needed to get her to a place of safety. I lifted her up as gently as I could and set off walking. We passed the creature's body. Rot in Hades, I thought as I looked away from it for the last time. I carried her through the old settlement and on. The relief of finding her gave me the strength to move swiftly and surely. My markings were clear and easy to follow. Every now and then I would speak to her. I said things like, "Remember that time the police brought me home? Boy, were Mom and Dad mad." She didn't respond to anything I said, but I kept talking to her. Kept holding her tight as we neared the truck, and finally reached it. I placed her carefully in the passenger seat and then went round to the driver's side and got behind the wheel. I turned the key. The engine did not start. I tapped the dashboard and asked the truck to be kind to me and then tried again, but still nothing. A third time lucky, I thought. But then I heard a growl. I looked up and fear gripped me. The creature was 6 feet away from the truck. It raised its head slowly and bared its hideous teeth. They were stained dark with its own dried blood. More crimson stains marked its gray pelt below its destroyed eye, as if it had been weeping blood. How was it still alive? I didn't know. This thing that was an aberration in the natural world. It growled again. I tore my gaze away from it. We needed to get away from there. It had been a long time since I had asked a higher power for help, but I did then. I turned the key and finally the engine kicked into life. As it did, the creature leapt. The truck lurched forwards and the creature crashed into the windscreen, which cracked and then gave way. Suddenly, there were claws inside the truck, inches away from my face, trying to slash at me, and a muzzle and blood-stained fangs slick with drool. I threw myself to the side onto my sister, covering her and trying to protect her. When I did, the creature pulled back for a moment. It was gearing up for a new attack, I figured, which gave me a few seconds to act. I reached out with one hand and I grabbed the wheel, twisted my leg so that I could press down onto the pedal, and I went for it. I floored the pedal and the car rushed forwards. The creature was still on the front hood, a dark, crazed mass blocking my vision. "No hangers on," I muttered under my breath and slammed on the brake. The creature toppled backwards onto the ground. I raced forwards again, using the truck like a weapon now. Sickening sounds filled the vehicle as it hit the creature. I tried to reverse away so that I could attack it again, but the truck was wrecked and juddered to a halt. I reached over my sister and opened the door and maneuvered us both out. I laid her very gently on the ground and then looked over at the creature. From the angle of its head, I knew that it would not be coming back from this. It was finally dead. Game over. I knelt by my sister and wept. I didn't notice her raise her hand until her fingers had brushed my cheek. I looked down at her face. Her eyes were open. "Hey," I said. "Hey." Her reply was hoarse and she began to cough. "It's okay," I said. "That thing's dead and you're safe now. I'm gonna get you to town and then we can get the help you need." She grimaced as a spasm of pain had passed through her, and then she said, "No, you have to keep me away from the other people." "I don't understand," I told her. She looked at me and said, "It wanted me to be its bride. It changed me with a bite and now I'm not human anymore. Her gaze drifted to the body of the creature. I looked over as well and felt a jolt of shock pass through me. It was no longer the corpse of a monstrous creature lying on the ground. It was the corpse of a man. My sister's fingers once again touched my face and she guided me to look at her. He was a shapeshifter, and now so am I. Our journey home was long and difficult. I carried her back to the town and then stole a car, and when that ran out of petrol, I stole another. I parked in shadows when I went to buy food from roadside diners. My sister slept most of the time. I slept only when I had to. At last, we pulled up outside my cabin. I helped her out of the car and supported her inside. 2 days later, she changed before my eyes for the first time. She became the creature for a few hours and then turned back into a person. That was 6 months ago, and she has changed again many times. The change emerges without warning. The young, shy, bright woman once more becomes the creature for hours, sometimes even days at a time. It holds back from attacking me because it recognizes me. Even so, we made the decision that while she was in her altered state, she should be kept hidden in a secure place. I reinforced and soundproofed a room in the cabin with steel and padlocks to be her cage. This breaks my heart, but until we find a way that she can control the darkness inside of her, what other choice is there? If anybody else encountered her, they would see a monster that had to be destroyed. I see my little sister, and I will always be there for her. Today's episode is sponsored by Rocket Money. How closely do you track your bank statements and credit card history? Are you combing through every single charge, a subscription on a regular basis, or just assume everything's fine until you notice that something's weird? Honestly, for me, I don't have time to watch my accounts that closely. But now that I'm using Rocket Money, it does all that for me so I don't have to worry about it. Rocket Money is a personal finance app that finds and cancels your unwanted subscriptions, monitors your spending, and helps lower your bills so that you can grow your savings. Rocket Money has over 5 million users and has saved a total of $500 million in canceled subscriptions, saving members up to $740 a year when using all of the app's features. Stop wasting money on things that you don't use. Cancel your unwanted subscriptions by going to rocketmoney.com/MrCreeps. That's rocketmoney.com/MrCreeps. rocketmoney.com/MrCreeps. A few years ago, I decided I needed a major life change. Everything seemed to be going downhill. My finances, my mental health, my life. I would go weeks without sleeping sometimes as the heavy traffic passed through these city streets down below. Every time I went outside, I saw more homeless people, more garbage and trash littering the ground, more muggings and ODs and deaths. This city had become a wasteland, and I knew that it was time to leave. I had no girlfriend, no wife, no kids. My parents had both passed a few years prior, and I barely talked to my siblings anymore. I had nothing to tie me down to this place where I felt like I was dying inside a little more each day. That's when I sold nearly everything that I owned, got in my car and drove up to Alaska to try starting anew. I bought a small cabin and a plot of land in the middle of its majestic mountains and dark, enchanting forests. In the winter, the northern lights would shine through like the eyes of God, sending out divine trails of light that danced through the sky in cosmic waves. And while the move did help me get some peace of mind, in the end, the source of all my problems had ultimately followed me thousands of miles into this endless wilderness. It would take me a long time to realize the cause of all this misery was myself. Because, as a wise man once said, wherever I go, there I am. I lived in that cabin for 3 months without any major issues other than the constant threat of bears, moose, and wolves. I had a rifle and a shotgun for hunting, a small garden in the backyard, and a solar panel to generate electricity. This is the life, I said, relaxing on a hammock that I had strung across the corner of the cabin while staring at the endless beauty directly outside my window. White-capped mountains loomed like giants in front of thick clusters of evergreens. A virgin covering of fluffy snow made the entire world glisten and sparkle. There wasn't a house or road in sight. No work, no stress, no pollution, no cars honking all the time. I closed my eyes, breathing in the clean air. I ended up falling asleep for a couple of hours, waking up just as the sun had started setting. Bright orange streaks mixed with the bloody smears of the fading light as it disappeared behind the mountains. I groggily arose, stumbling over to make a cup of instant coffee. As I sipped it, I wandered around the room looking for something to pass the time. There were still quite a few random objects left behind by the last owner that I hadn't gotten rid of yet. I had moved in to find a stocked bookshelf filled with classics by Philip K. Dick, Isaac Asimov, and Robert Heinlein. Bored, I started rifling through the collection, looking for something good to pass the time. As I shuffled past A Maze of Death and Ubik, something caught my eye. A black leather-bound book with no title or author name stood there, its cover faded with time and wear. Curious, I pulled it out and opened it. I saw the cursive scrawled across the pages in a neat copperplate script, and realized it was a diary left behind by the previous owner. The first entry was dated January 9th, 2015. This is what it said. I don't know if I'm going crazy or not. I went into town to talk to my therapist yesterday and she said that I should try writing everything down. She talks to me like it's all in my head, but I know that it's not. When I first moved into the cabin, it seemed like paradise. I never thought in a million years that something would be slinking around at night. I never thought it would be hiding under my bed, peeking in windows and following me like a shadow. Right now, I'm snowed in with a cup of coffee in one hand and my pistol in the other. I can't sleep anymore. I keep hearing something shuffling around under my bed. Sometimes I think I even hear ragged breathing, as if a corpse with dirt in its lungs has come back to life. I've caught glimpses of that thing in the darkness. Whatever it is, its skin is loose, almost falling off the bone. It almost looks like an emaciated man. Its eyes are rotted and dark and its back hunched, its spine twisted and jutting out like tumors. It moves in this slow and jerky way, but I can never seem to catch it. Its body seems broken and out of alignment. Its legs bend the wrong way sometimes. By the time that I turn on the lights or try to take a video of it, it's always disappeared. But its fetid odor remains. It lingers in the cabin like a sweet-smelling, spreading infection. I don't know what it wants from me. I want to leave, but with the storm raging outside, I'm stuck here, unable to get all the way back to town. The snow surrounds the cabin in mounds 5 feet high. I feel like a prisoner caged with a rabid beast, not knowing when it will strike. My wife claims that she hasn't seen or heard anything, but she keeps vanishing on me. Last night, she disappeared in the middle of a snowstorm. Where did you go? I asked her in the morning, but she said that she was here the whole time. She didn't remember anything. There's no way that she went into town. There wasn't time and the trails were impassable that far down. Something's going on here, but I don't know what it is. I'm truly scared for our lives. I slammed the diary shut, not wanting to read anymore. I didn't want to become infected by some kind of contagious cabin fever. If the last owner had gone insane in the mountains and started hallucinating naked corpses crawling around, I really didn't want to know. I shoved the diary back in the bookshelf, going for a maze of death instead. I tried to forget what I had read in the diary as I flew through the novella. All night, though, I tried to get the image of the twisting man with rotted eyes out of my head, but I couldn't. I eventually fell asleep right before dawn, but as my eyes were closing, I thought that I saw a silhouette in a window, a starved man with excited black eyes that seemed to be rotting out of his skull. I thought that I saw him put his inhumanly long fingers against the glass as he leaned forward. I blinked, sitting up and glancing out into the white, snow-covered wonderland. There was nothing there. Another hunter occasionally followed the deer trails near my cabin. A frozen lake stood a quarter-mile away, the surface white and covered in thick drifts of snow. I bundled up, deciding to go outside for a hike in the frigid dawn. I strapped on my snowshoes and grabbed my shotgun, as I always did when I went outside. I never knew when a bear might be waiting around the next tree after all. I opened the door, seeing footprints pressed into the snow all around my house. At first, I thought it was that silhouette that I had seen, the nightmarish thing from the diary. But the footprints didn't go over to my window. They followed the trail 20 feet away, veering off toward the frozen lake at the bottom of the hill. I glanced down in that direction, seeing a black figure plodding slowly forward. "Steve!" I cried, recognizing my only neighbor in a 4-mile radius. He had a cabin about a mile away on his own little plot of land. He jumped, clearly startled by the sudden noise. His black snow pants and heavy fur coat swished together as he spun, raising his rifle high. When he saw me, he immediately lowered it and put a gloved hand up in a friendly greeting. "No way, Josh. Surprised to see you up this early," he yelled over the muted, wintry landscape. The sounds always seemed different after it snowed, as if all the noise in the world had become faded and dead. "Yeah, I've been having a little trouble sleeping," I said, slinging my shotgun around my shoulder. "What are you doing anyway?" Just a little hunting, you know," he said, giving me a sly wink. "Animals are always most active around dusk and dawn, it seems. That's when I always have the best luck anyway." He stepped close to me, staring me in the eyes. "You do look like crap. Those bags under your eyes are big enough to carry groceries in." "Yeah, trust me, I know. Hey, this might sound a little weird, but did you know the previous owner of this cabin?" I asked. Steve's wrinkled old face fell into a scowl. His expression immediately became guarded and distant. Sure, we met," he exclaimed bluntly. He seemed to be searching my face for something, but I didn't know what. His reaction left me feeling off balance and nervous. "Is he still around?" I said. Steve's scowl deepened. "Buddy, I don't know what this is about, but he's dead, and he's been dead. Died in that cabin, actually." He pointed a finger at my home accusingly. With those words, my heart seemed to drop into my stomach. Waves of dread flowed through my body like water. "How did he die? Like a heart attack or something?" I asked. Steve's gaze turned downwards. He didn't meet my eyes. "Do you know that Alaska has the highest missing persons rate in the entire United States? It's not even close. In fact, for the population size, we have far more people who go missing and never get found than anywhere else. They even have a name for it. The Alaska Triangle," Steve said, "and we're square in the middle of it." I stared blankly at him, wondering where he was going with this. It seemed like a way to avoid answering my question. "No, I didn't know that," I responded. Steve nodded, raising his head again. He heaved a deep sigh. "Look, the thing with the last owner and his wife, it's somewhat disturbing. If you really want to know, I'll tell you, but it's certainly not going to help your peace of mind. and it definitely isn't going to help you get some sleep. I want to know, I insisted instantly. The wind started to whip past us. Flakes of ice and snow flew sideways in these sudden currents. Let's go back to your cabin then, Steve said, pulling his heavy fur-lined hood off and shaking off his long black hair behind him. I could use a bit of whiskey to warm up. We sat down with a bottle of Johnny Walker and 2 shot glasses. I wasn't much of a drinker, but Steve certainly was. He chugged 3 shots in the span of a minute. I sipped at mine, drinking half and putting it back down on the coffee table with a thunk. Steve grunted, hissing through his open mouth for a moment. "Ah, that's the good stuff," he said, slamming his chest as the burning liquor worked its way down. Steve looked up at me with a new sparkle in his eyes. So you want to know about what happened to Will Lenning? Well, I'll tell you that no one really knows the whole story. I used to see him occasionally come down and have a drink and talk. We all know each other around here, obviously. I nodded, motioning him on. He seemed like a normal, upstanding guy. Kinda reminded me of you, actually. A young guy trying to escape the hustle and bustle of the city life, the cancer of the American dream. Well, he was here for maybe a couple of months, I don't know. Everything seemed fine. We used to go skeet shooting occasionally, have a beer, you know. We'd get together with a couple of other hunters who lived closer to town and sometimes play poker. I never saw anything odd about Will. I never could have predicted what happened to him. He heaved a long sigh at this, looking out the window at the sharp mountains with an expression of nostalgia. Well, what happened to him? I asked, encouraging him to go on. He started talking about seeing somebody peering in through his window at night. He talked about hearing sounds from under his bed while he was laying there in the dark. Sounds like diseased breathing and shuffling. He started keeping all the lights on in his cabin 24/7. Steve leaned close to me. A glimmer of fear rippled across his pale, wrinkled face. He started to lose his mind. Started digging holes all over the place looking for something. Even in the middle of snowstorms, I would occasionally see him outside digging. It seemed like he never slept anymore. It was classic cabin fever if I ever saw it. It was only a few weeks later that I came over here concerned. I hadn't heard from him in a few days, which was fairly unusual. I found the door hanging wide open, propped up in a chair in the exact spot where you now sit. Will lay with the blast hole showing clear through his skull, shotgun laying at his feet. And next to him, I found a blood-stained diary open to the middle page. The last entry was stained with red, but still visible. I remember leaning down and reading it. It was only a few sentences long. I glanced over at the bookshelf with the same diary saying nothing. It said something like, "I see now what's going on. The twisted man is leading me to the truth. Today I will finally find it." And that was his last note? I asked, my heart hammering in my chest. He nodded. Yeah, I went into town and got some rangers to come check it out. Eventually they got cops and a CSI here. They took all this stuff as evidence, including the diary, he said. And good riddance, I say. Reading something like that is never beneficial. Sometimes delusions spread like a virus, you know what I mean. I did, but I said nothing. I glanced back at the diary, its black leather cover gleaming like a crouching snake. And I wondered, if the police took the diary as evidence, how did it get back here? You said that he had a wife living here with him too, I asked. Yeah, she went missing around the same time, he said. Pretty bizarre, the cops thought that maybe she just moved away, but... He shook his head grimly. As far as I know, she was never seen again. It was like she had evaporated into thin air. After Steve left, I walked stiffly over to the bookshelf, taking down the diary. I flipped open through the pages. In the middle, I found the last entry. Spatters of old, darkened blood were scattered over the page like raindrops. I found the note and I read the date. January 27th, 2015, it read. Will Lenning had not lived long after he had started seeing the Twisted Man. I wondered if my fate would be the same. The sun had started to set outside as I sat with the diary at the small circular kitchen table eating some stewed venison and rice as I read through the entries. At the end, Will Lenning said the Twisted Man had been trying to guide him somewhere, that in fact the Twisted Man had been trying to protect him from some great evil, rather than being the source of it. I scoffed, feeling a flash of anger at his stupidity. His naivety obviously led to his death, but then a flash of insight struck me like lightning. What if I was committing the same kind of stupidity? Perhaps I should just grab my gun and valuables and leave. I could take off on the snowmobile and be in town within a couple of hours. But in my heart I knew that I wouldn't. Something about the mystery of all this beckoned me to stay. Like a siren leading sailors to destruction, my curiosity called out to me, and I knew that I wouldn't be leaving that night. I needed answers, and sadly I would find them. I had fallen asleep with an empty bottle of beer in my hand. I sat in front of the TV, which only got satellite reception. There were, of course, no cable or phone lines threading their way through the forest. All my power came from stored solar energy. Since I rarely watched TV and really only used it to cook or heat up water for bathing, the energy produced was sufficient even in winter. Tonight, though, I needed its sound, its mindless flashing of light and colors and canned laughter. It seemed to drive away the creepy and suffocating presence like a candle. I woke suddenly, the TV flashed with static, the repetitive hissing of the white noise spit from the speakers like thousands of snakes. I glanced up at the clock. 3:33 a.m. I looked around the dark cabin, confused for a long moment. I didn't understand what had woken me so abruptly. The satellite had never gone out before either, even with the howling winds and freezing hail of the Alaskan winter. The TV started flickering as if the static were rising upwards. Black lines traced their way horizontally across the screen. The hissing deepened into a gurgle, and for a second, I thought that I heard faint words behind the white noise. I thought that I heard breathing, slow and diseased, like the death gasp of a drowning man. A black line rose across the TV and an image came into view. The cabin was suddenly plunged into silence except for the shrieking, wintry wind outside. I leaned close to the screen, confused at what I was looking at. It looked like a live camera feed of a room. As I took in the details, I realized that it was my cabin. I saw myself in the chair leaning close to the screen. I raised my hand and the miniature version of me on the screen did likewise. Ice water seemed to drip down my spine as waves of dread coursed through my body. "What the heck is this?" I whispered, looking back to where the camera should be. It was just a coarse wooden ceiling in that corner. I turned back to the screen and I nearly screamed. The TV showed a pale, naked man crouching directly behind my chair now. With jerky movements, he rose, his broken spine twisting and shivering. A hissing voice rang out from the speakers. It spoke as if it had dirt and writhing maggots in its throat. "He is a killer, the shadow of death. Many have fallen, many lie buried across this forest. You will be next. He's watching you." Long broken fingers with blackened nails reached out to touch my shoulders. I jumped out of the chair, stumbling back as I spun around in terror. My back smashed into the TV and it fell to the floor with a shattering of glass and an explosion of light. In those few moments before the darkness descended on me like a blanket, I thought that I glimpsed a pale, sunken face with rotted, blackened eyes peeking out from behind the chair. I turned on every light in the cabin, but there was no sign of the Twisted Man now. I knew that I had to get out of there though. I thought about the warning that the voice had spoken. If the creature wanted to attack me, then why hadn't it just killed me while I was sleeping? None of it made sense. Who was watching me, the twisted man? And if he was, why warn me? Perhaps it was psychological warfare, I thought to myself. Perhaps the twisted man simply liked to play with his food before he ate it. The thoughts raced through my head at 8,000 miles an hour as I threw on snow pants and a couple heavy sweaters and coats. I covered up my entire body as much as I could to try to prevent frostbite. I had made up my mind to flee. There was no snowstorm tonight, though the entire landscape was blanketed in it, and I knew the windshield would be like an ice blade whipping against my skin. It was extremely dangerous to travel in the middle of the night like this in temperatures that might reach -30 degrees. Steve had been right after all. Alaska had the highest missing persons rate of any state, and many of them were never found. Their bodies likely frozen solid in the deep snow, dozens of miles from the nearest town. I grabbed my shotgun, jumped on my snowmobile, and started heading to Steve's cabin. I hoped that I could wait there until the sunrise and then figure out what to do next. But fate would take the decision out of my hands. I felt like there were eyes watching me as I drove along the narrow, winding deer trail. The boughs of the evergreens reached into the path like greedy hands, grabbing at my coat and legs. More than a couple of times I saw a pale, naked figure standing in the snow, but it was always gone when I turned to look. I gave a sigh of relief when Steve's place appeared in the distance. I could see the lights twinkling through the small windows of his log cabin. I pulled up next to his door looking down. I saw 2 pairs of footprints there, one much smaller than the other. I found it odd, but I shrugged it off. The snowmobile cut out with a sucking gurgle. I knocked on the door hard a few times. Steve appeared after a few moments, groggy and half-dressed. He blinked slowly as he looked me up and down. His wrinkled face fell into a frown. "Steve, I need a favor," I said quickly. "Something weird is happening in my cabin. Can I stay here until the morning? Until maybe I can go into town or something. I just can't stay at my place tonight." He nodded, yawning and motioning me in. "You can sleep on the couch, I guess," Steve said. "Put that shotgun somewhere safe though, boy." He had a partitioned bedroom in his cabin. It was significantly larger than my little one-room cabin, though it was basically still just a joint kitchen living room, a small bedroom and a bathroom. He pointed to a well-worn couch in the corner and gave me an apathetic wave as he stumbled back into his bedroom, slamming the door shut. I couldn't sleep though. I tiptoed around the room looking at Steve's bookshelf. He had a rather strange taste in books. Lots of Anne Rule and true crime there. I saw dozens of books about Ted Bundy, John Wayne Gacy, Richard Chase, Herbert Mullen, Jeffrey Dahmer, and Richard Ramirez among the collection. At the end, a large black binder stood, unlabeled and worn-looking. It reminded me of the look on that leather-bound diary for a second, and my heart dropped. But logically, I knew this was just a coincidence. Yet still, I pulled out the binder and my curiosity piqued. What I found inside filled me with dread and horror. Countless news clippings covered the length of it. The first clipping was from nearly 20 years earlier, about a woman who went missing in the Alaskan forest while hiking. A later one confirmed that her body was never found, and that her family was still hoping that she would turn up somewhere. A reward was offered for any information, it said. And every page after that was more of the same. Missing woman, murdered, missing man, no leads. I kept flipping through until I found clippings about Will Lenning's death and the sudden disappearance of his wife. On the article about it, Steve had used a red marker to scrawl, "Haha," right next to it. I heard the click of a gun being cocked from behind me. I froze as Steve's voice traveled across the room like a whisper. "How do you like my work, friend?" he asked, his tone jovial and mocking. I still held the binder of horrors tightly in my hand as I stared open-mouthed at this man that I thought I knew. It's you. What? You killed Will Lenning and his wife, and a lot of other women apparently. Everything felt unreal, as if I were stuck in a dream. Steve's grin spread across his face, but his blue eyes stayed cold and dead. Yeah, well, she was cheating on him with me anyway. Just another one of those, you know. They always get what's coming to them in the end. He hissed with hatred oozing from his voice. That's too bad, really. I just killed another one tonight. I was planning on saving you for later. The urge isn't too bad yet right now after all. It comes in cycles, you see. It comes in waves. I saw a glimmer of pale, naked flesh writhing behind Steve. With jerky movements, the twisted man came up behind him. I said nothing, just watching with wide-eyed horror and amazement. You need help, man, I whispered. Steve laughed. Help? The only help they give people like me is a needle in the arm. You know that. That's why it's important to always cover your tracks. The twisted man ran a long broken finger across Steve's neck. Steve gave a strangled cry and jumped. He spun around screaming. I glanced over at my shotgun next to the couch. I jumped for it as Steve turned back to me, firing his pistol twice. The first bullet soared high above me, raining wood splinters down on my head, but the second ripped into my leg. A cold burning pain ran like fire up my shin. I screamed in agony and battle fury as I gripped the shotgun, spinning and firing. Steve's head exploded and the slug ripped through his brain. His forehead collapsed like a smashed melon as bone splinters and red sprayed the wall behind him. The twisted man stood there hunched over, grinning up at me. I felt warm blood gushing from my leg as I stared back at him, breathing hard. I wondered if I was dying. You weren't after me at all, were you? I asked. You were after Steve. But the twisted man said nothing. After a long moment, he slinked back into the shadows of the bedroom and disappeared. As night crawled its way toward morning, I thought back to the words the twisted man had spoken through the TV, suddenly understanding everything. He's a killer, the shadow of death. Many have fallen, many lie buried across this forest. You'll be next, he's watching you. He hadn't been trying to hurt me at all, he had been trying to warn me. He had probably tried to warn Will Lenning and his wife too. I wrapped my leg in gauze, gritting my teeth. The wound looked puckered and deep, but I could still move my foot, and the bullet had gone clean through the flesh. I poured alcohol on it, screaming in pain as it burned its way through my skin. After rummaging through Steve's bathroom, I found some prescription painkillers and swallowed a handful of them with a beer. I knew that I would need this to get through the pain of riding into town with a busted-up leg. As the sun finally rose, I made my way outside the blood-stained floors of the cabin to my snowmobile. Before I left, I glanced back at that horrid place, the scene of so much torment and death. In the open doorway, the twisted man stood, his back hunched, his rotted lips grinning at me. His hand lifted up into the air with jerky movements and waved. I waved back as I started the engine and headed into town. The first thing people noticed about Saklas was his metal teeth. Coated in steel, his long, sharp, silvery teeth always gleamed when he smiled. Saklas was an albino. His pink eyes and colorless skin looked slightly inhuman, especially on such a large, muscular body. I never saw him come out in the daytime. Perhaps the light hurt his eyes. He always wore trench coats and black jeans and boots. It appeared that he had shaved all the hair in his head. It made his chalk-white skull seem to throb in the darkness like a mutated, fleshy egg. That guy gives me the creeps, my girlfriend Stacy said as she stared out the window of our trailer park, seeing him disappear down one of the side streets. Her chestnut-colored hair hung over her back in a French braid. Her dark eyes narrowed as she looked out into the night. "I think he gives us all the creeps," I said, shrugging and taking a sip of the steaming cup of coffee that I held in my hand. "He walks around here every night, though. What can you do?" "You could get a gun," Stacy said, glancing over at me. I sighed. "I don't want a gun," I said. "You're far more likely to accidentally shoot a family member then." But my words were cut off by a blood-curdling scream from outside. I jumped. The coffee cup fell to the floor. I saw it tumbling, the burning liquid spilling out all over my legs and slippered feet. I gasped, stumbling back. "Oh, come on," I yelled, looking up at Stacy. Her face had gone pale as she continued to stare out the window. I saw her hands trembling, her fingers clenching into fists. Her eyes had widened to the size of dinner plates. I took a few stiff steps towards her, putting my hand on her shoulder. "What's wrong?" I hissed, looking out the window. I saw an old woman backpedaling away from a chubby man with cream-colored skin and silvery orbs for eyes. He hissed like some sort of rabid animal, showing the two long, curving vampiric teeth that stabbed out of his mottled and white gums. The old woman swung a heavy purse in front of her body over and over, shrieking in a cantankerous voice. Streams of blood flowed from bite marks on her neck and shoulder. Her white nightgown had become soaked in wet crimson blotches that clung to her skinny and bony body. The man laughed, a sound like a freezing wind blowing through a graveyard. His voice echoed through the park, sounding raspy and diseased. "You're surrounded. Nowhere to run." "Leave me alone," she yelled in a quavering voice. "Get away, you lunatic, I'm calling the cops." His hand shot out in a blur and grabbed her wrist, the snapping of bones reverberating down the street. I felt sick as I listened to her frantic shrieks fill the air. Shards of bone stabbed through the skin of her wrist. Her right hand nearly touched the back of her arm. Bright streams of blood spurted from the destroyed limb. She raised her red hand in front of her face, staring at it in amazement and horror. I watched her fall back onto the concrete. It all seemed to happen in slow motion. The vampiric abomination lunged forward in a blur. His long fingers came up, wrapping around her hair. He twisted her head back. She looked like a sheep waiting to be slaughtered. His curving fangs bit through the skin of her neck. As her eyes rolled back in her head and her screams faded to nothing, he drank. I ran around the trailer, locking all the doors and windows. Dark, skulking silhouettes passed by on all sides, hissing to each other in strange and foreign tongues. At that moment, the power cut out, and we were plunged into total darkness. "Oh, come on," I said, stumbling into a table. Stacy was nearby, trying to get the police on the line. She held the cell phone close to her ear, whispering as if we were in a graveyard. After a few moments, I heard her murmuring words float through the shadows. "Yes, hello, my name is Stacy Kidman. We need help immediately. Somebody has been murdered outside. Send help to the Granite Pond Trailer Park, Unit 777. Her voice was cut off by the sound of shattering glass. She screamed. I heard the phone fall to the ground with a clatter. It landed screen up, and its dim light continued to allow me to see faintly across the room. Stacy's chalk-white face hovered in front of the smashed window. She choked, gagging and fighting. Wrapped around her neck, I saw a pale, emaciated arm with black, claw-like nails. A few moments later, I heard the locked front door break open with a single and powerful blow. Standing there stood Saklas with his grinning metal teeth, silhouetted in the moonlight like a pale demon rising out of hell. Behind him loomed a dozen of those vampiric abominations with eyes like pale moonlight. There were blacks, whites, and olive-skinned complexions among the changed. A few vampiric women stood in the crowd, fresh blood dripping from their fangs. I even saw a little girl among the undead. Stacy's eyes bulged out of her head. She tried to scream, but the arm tightened around her throat, choking off her air. On the floor, I heard the faint voice of the 911 operator calling out from the other end from the cell phone. As Saklas stepped forward triumphantly, I knew that we were doomed. I saw death in his cold gaze and in his iron grin. Stacy gave a choked gasp. Tears streamed down her face and she silently sobbed. Her back held tightly against the wall as she faced down her doom. "Oh, I'm really sorry about all this," Saklas said disingenuously, his eyes flashing with amusement and excitement. "But I have a job to do after all. The master says we must build an army, and a wise man once said, 'An army runs on its stomach.'" He gave a quick nod to his inhuman zealots. With a scream, Stacy disappeared out the window. I started to run toward her, my arm outstretched, but a pale blur zoomed across the room and tackled me. A large, thin vampire came loping around the front of the trailer, effortlessly dragging a struggling Stacy behind him. Stacy and I had our hands yanked behind our backs. We were dragged into the kitchen where the grinning, stoning faces of the monsters regarded us with bloodlust and hunger. "Okay, who gets these ones?" Saklas asked in a bored tone. The little girl stepped forward, gnashing her teeth. A small rivulet of clear drool dripped from her tiny and pursed mouth. "I must eat, I haven't eaten yet tonight." Saklas gave her a wide, toothy smile and motioned her forward. Her tanned skin looked like stone. Fangs protruded from her mouth like two deadly hypodermic needles. "Take the girl first," Saklas said, pointing at Stacy. "Her blood looks clear and pure. This one here probably tastes bitter and rancid." He grabbed me by the hair as he said it, roughly shoving my head to the side. "I'll take him after she finishes off the woman," a black vampire said, his shaved head gleaming in the dull moonbeam streaming in from the kitchen window. Their silvery eyes gave off a dim light that covered the room in a pale, ghostly glow. Like the girl, this man's skin looked solid and unyielding, as if it had turned into hard granite. He ran a long tongue over his fangs. It looked forked like the tongue of a serpent. The vampiric girl lunged forward, running at Stacy in her excitement over the fresh meat struggling in front of her. Stacy screamed. She stood next to the sink, both her wrists pinned behind her back by a strong, muscular vampiric man. The man's pale face glittered as Stacy struggled to pull her slender wrists out of his iron grasp. She tried to kick backwards, aiming at his shins and knees, but he didn't even flinch. He bent her arms back, forcing her head down until Stacy was face to face with the girl. "Please don't hurt me," Stacy pleaded. I tried to fight against the vampire, pinning my arms behind my back. He pushed my arms up. A stabbing pain ran through my body as I screamed in fury and agony. "Leave her alone," I shrieked. Saklas gave me a sly wink. The little girl opened her mouth wide, far wider than seemed humanly possible, as if her jaw had unhinged like a snake's. A forked tongue flicked out. In a blur, her gaping black hole of a mouth snapped shut around Stacy's neck. She gave a choked gasp. Stacy's eyes rolled back in her head, the whites shining like cataracts. My screaming devolved into sobbing as twin crimson rivers flowed from the bite. The vampiric girl reminded me of an infant suckling on its mother's breast. She gave happy grunts and soft moans of pleasure as she drank. At that moment, I knew that we were both doomed. The eyes of the many vampires hung in the air like bright silver galaxies spiraling in the void. In that moment, it felt like all of them were focused directly at me. My adrenaline was so high that the world seemed to shimmer translucent white. I could feel my heart beating like a jackhammer. In the gloom of this, nobody noticed these silhouettes sneaking in through the shattered trailer park door, especially not me and my sorrow and powerlessness. The attack from the figure came silently. An old Spanish man with a sharp scimitar sword held in his hand sprinted forwards. He was dressed in a coarse poncho with sharp triangular patterns of black, orange, and white jutting through the middle. The curving blade gleamed in the dim light as it soared towards the nearest vampire. It audibly whizzed through the air in a blur. The vampire, a pale young woman, didn't even get the chance to turn around before her head flew off her body. As if in slow motion, I watched it soar across the room as spiraling gouts of blood flew from her neck. The eyes continued to shine and the mouth continued to gnash the air, even as it smacked hard into the wall before landing on the wooden floor with a heavy crash. The vampire holding an unconscious Stacy dropped her hard to the floor with a loud growl, advancing forward toward this new threat. The little vampiric girl rose, turning her head towards the dangerous newcomer. Her fangs made a sucking sound when they pulled out of the skin. The other vampires had devolved into chaos. I felt my hands released as the one behind me rushed forward to attack the old man. Saklas's expression fell into a deep scowl. He pulled out an enormous black revolver from his inner coat pocket, aiming it at the old man's head. A gunshot rang out from the front of the house. I saw an old woman standing there with a rifle held in her hands. She was dressed similarly to the old man, wearing some sort of poncho that might have been at home in the Andes. Saklas gave a bloody gurgle before falling to the ground. An exit wound the size of an orange stuck out the back of his chest. I could see the tangled masses of organs and flesh held within. The laser sight quickly moved on to the next target, dancing over the head of a pale young woman. The old man continued advancing on the vampires surrounding Stacy, striking at their necks. He ducked when they tried clawing him with their long black talons. He moved like a much younger man, slipping through the crowd of monsters like a shadow. The old woman continued firing her rifle, dropping another 3 of the vampires. Stacy had started to regain consciousness. Her eyes fluttered and she moaned softly. She crawled forward, pushing herself up slowly with her trembling hands. Thin rivulets of blood continued to stream down her neck, staining her white shirt with crimson splotches. "Come at me," the old man cried in a battle frenzy as another vampire rushed him. He brought the blade straight down into the center of the vampiric man's skull. His head split open with a crunch of bones and a blossoming explosion of brains. "Mewtwo, it's time to go," he yelled at us. I didn't need any more encouragement than that. I ran over to Stacy, threading my arms under her shoulders before dragging her up. She staggered, putting out her hands before her like a blind person. I wrapped my arm around her and helped her stumble forward. The few remaining vampires had all retreated by this point. The little girl and a few others ran straight through the back door. It splintered into 100 tiny fragments as they smashed right through it without slowing. Within moments, they had faded into the night. "We have to find somewhere safe," the old man said. "There's more of them coming, but for now we have a car waiting outside. We need to get you out of here before they show up." "Oh, thank God," Stacy mumbled. Her pale face seemed haunted. Within her eyes, I saw what kind of nightmare she and I were trapped in reflected back at me. We found a black SUV with the headlights on parked in the middle of the street. The old man gestured me and Stacy to the back. He pushed his long, silvery hair back, pulling down the hood of the poncho. His face was covered in sweat. He went over to some bushes in my yard, wiping the blade of the sword off on the leaves, trying to clean away some of the foul vampiric blood. Stacy collapsed in the back seat with a long sigh. I put my arm around her, pulling her close. She shivered in my grasp. Her body felt cold and small. The old man jumped into the driver's seat and the old woman into the passenger seat. They kept their weapons next to them. continuously checking the rearview mirrors in the shadows of the forest nearby. Within seconds, the old man peeled out, heading out of the trailer park. We passed countless bodies drained of blood and left in the street like pieces of garbage. "Are you okay?" the old woman asked, turning her head to look back at us. Stacy nodded weakly. "I think so. She only got me for a couple of seconds before you guys came in, I think. It hurts though. It's like somebody stabbed me in the neck." "They did stab you in the neck," I said. I turned to look the old woman in the eyes. The expression there seemed wise and peaceful. "I'm Jack and this is Stacy. Thank you so much for saving us. I thought that we were dead for sure." "I'm Cristiano and this is Maria," the old man said, his dark eyes constantly alert as we swerved through the labyrinthine streets of the enormous trailer park. I could see the front entrance by now. Behind it, a single police car parked there with its lights silently flashing. The blue and red strobing made the shadows all around us jump and dance in eerie flashes. On the ground nearby, I saw the bodies of the two officers. Their pale faces stared up at the cloudless sky, their lips blue. Deep puncture marks on their necks dribbled clotted blood down their cold and dead flesh. "So much for the cops," I said. Cristiano nodded. "The police never did much in my country either," he said. "The Vampiro do as they will and pass where they will. The master has much money and power after all. He can buy the police and government officials." I leaned forwards, interested. "Do you know what's going on here?" I whispered intently. "Do you know where these things came from?" He nodded grimly. "I've known of your friend Saklos for quite a while. I knew he was involved in trafficking rings. They move illegals across the border for a price, or so they claim. Some of them do arrive surely, but a lot of them just disappear. The family members notice eventually, but who can they call? They don't know if they disappeared in Guatemala or in Mexico, or if they made it to the US after all and then something happened to them. It's the perfect crime, right?" I nodded. Maria looked sickened. "It is foul and evil," she said. "They feed on everyone, the men, women, and children. The Vampiro do not discriminate. In fact, I think they prefer the younger blood, especially that of infants." Cristiano muttered darkly at this, making the sign of the cross. "Anyway, the Vampiro worked their way up here, as they will over time. They got smuggled in the night. Perhaps the Vampiro trekked along the long, dark desert, or perhaps they were smuggled on the back of trucks. But regardless, they are here now and the master wishes to expand his army. For many years, we kept this plague contained to the Andes, to the small villages hidden in the cracks of the mountains. But now it has spread far and fast. It was only last year we got the first reports of the Vampiro in Mexico," Maria said, "and now they're up here. We came when we heard rumors of the planned attack. We captured, let's say, a spy." Her eyes glittered. "He didn't want to talk, but after I brought out the pliers and the silver dagger, he was only too happy to scream his song of truth." "We have a safe house nearby. A place owned by a sympathetic soul, let's say. There is a resistance forming all across the land, from Brazil to Texas. Indeed, many new souls have joined in the struggle, though for now we fight in secret. We call ourselves the Servants of the Iron Cross, and until the Vampiro declares itself publicly, neither will we." We pulled into the dirt driveway of the house. The lights were all on, the yellow light shining through the windows like a jack-o'-lantern. The lawn looked perfectly manicured. A quaint wooden fence surrounded the house. Beyond it, the land sloped downward into thick woods. Yet we weren't nearly far enough away from the trailer park or the vampires for my peace of mind. Stacy continuously glanced behind her, but the wounds on her neck had stopped bleeding and she seemed to be regaining some of her strength. Cristiano led the way, unlocking the front door and flinging it open. He called out as we entered a bedraggled ragtag group. "Hello," he cried, but the house stayed as silent as death. We walked through the front hallway. I noticed the ancient statues lining expensive mahogany tables on each side. I leaned close to one, seeing a Mayan god. It showed a slithering serpent with feathers and wings. Room by room, we searched the house. It was indeed totally empty. Maria took us upstairs. She slipped a silver key out of her pocket, unlocking an enormous wooden cabinet in the master bedroom. Behind it, I saw lines of pistols, rifles, shotguns, and grenades. Boxes of ammo were stocked on the top shelf. Thousands of rounds sorted by caliber and piled at the very top of the 8-foot-high cabinet. "You guys better take something," Maria said, her eyes gleaming as she looked at the weapons. She ran her wrinkled fingers over the scope of her rifle, a faint smile playing in the corners of her lips. "The Vampiro are spreading and they will surely hunt us all down before long. Nowhere's safe. We must stand and fight. There are, after all, worse things than death." We had gone around the safe house, locking all the doors and checking all the windows. Stacy and I had both taken shotguns and loaded them with slugs. I wasn't very accurate with a gun anyway at longer ranges, and Stacy had only fired a gun once, but I hoped that would be enough. I explained to her about loading slugs in the chamber, racking it, and how to turn the safety on and off. I knew a single shot from a slug would rip through flesh like butter, and I hoped the extra firepower would compensate for our lack of experience somewhat. I loaded 5 slugs into the Benelli. We had filled our pockets with extra ammunition. It wasn't long before I heard the hissing from in front of the house. It floated through the air like a death knell. Cristiano gave a panicked shout from where he kept watch near the window. "We have company," he screamed. "Get ready." I ran over to the window with Stacy by my side. Cristiano had his sword sheathed around his waist. Slung around his shoulder, he held an M16, the laser sight flicked on and ready to aim. Shotgun's good. You can use the slugs to shoot through walls." "Really?" I asked, feeling the terror and uncertainty of the few moments before a deadly battle. I felt like I would crawl right out of my skin. Cristiano nodded. "When they get near, you and her start shooting through the walls, especially the front door. They'll hit there in the windows. Maria and I will shoot at them from the sides. Now go, secure the front door." As I ran past, I glanced out the window. In the front of the pack, I saw Saklas. Blood still covered his shirt, but the wound had sealed over with some black, scab-like growth. His eyes glowed silver, the light spiraling and whirling in hypnotic currents. Behind him, I saw a few dozen of the monstrosities standing tall and fearless. They formed a triangle with the majority in the back. "Come out, Cristiano," Saklas yelled. "You've been a worthy opponent, and for that, I will give you a quick death. You've killed many of my comrades, Cristiano, but the Master is forgiving. And yet, if we have to come in, you will die screaming. We can make it last, Cristiano. We can stretch it out for you." I watched this intense exchange through the small window at the top of the front door. Saklas hissed the last sentence, his twin metal fangs protruding out of his mouth like the teeth of a rattlesnake. "Go to hell," Maria shouted from the left front window on the bottom floor. She fired a gun, scattering the vampires. They all ran at once towards the front of the house. Saklas called out commands in a low and guttural voice. Cristiano started shooting, emptying his clip as fast as he could into the crowd. "Get the windows," Saklas cried to those behind him. "We'll take the door." Within seconds, Saklas and 8 or 9 others were rushing towards me and Stacy. I felt my hands shaking as I nodded at her. "It's time," I said. "Get ready to start shooting." "I love you," she whispered as a tear slipped from her eye. "If we die." Her words were cut off as the door shuddered in its frame. More powerful blows rained down on it from the other side. I inhaled deeply before putting the Benelli point blank against the wood and firing. I quickly emptied all 5 rounds through the door. Stacy fired through the side window, her pale, sweaty face shining in the light. I heard screaming from outside, a tormented, gurgling death cry that rippled its way out of the abomination's throats. I peered through the window as I reloaded, seeing 3 of the vampires had giant holes torn into their faces and chests. Sakla still stood though, and with a final and powerful kick, he sent the hole-ridden door flying open. It smacked me hard in the face. I saw white stars for a few moments while I stumbled back, nearly falling. I slammed the back of my head hard against the wall, sliding down as Stacy screamed. Maria and Cristiano came running over, firing as dozens of vampires streamed in through the open door, and others crawled through the windows. More smashing came from the back of the house. I knew at that moment that we were surrounded. As Stacy frantically tried to reload her gun, Saklas raised a bone-white hand, black talons ripping out of the ends of his fingers. He swiped it hard across Stacy's arms, leaving 4 deep gouges in her skin and sending the gun flying. She gave a cry of surprise and pain. I groaned, my head swimming as I tried to rise to my feet. I still held the gun loosely in one hand. I was seeing double and felt warm blood streaming down the back of my scalp. "No!" Cristiano yelled as a vampire jumped on his back. He fired quickly at those surrounding him, blowing holes through their blackened hearts and cold, smiling faces. The one on his back sunk its teeth into his neck. I saw Cristiano slow down as his screams faded. With a crash, they fell together to the ground. Like a lamprey stuck to a fish, the vampire held on, drinking his blood as Cristiano stopped struggling. "Don't kill him," Saklas yelled. "I want him to suffer first." He turned to Stacy, grinning like a skull. I pulled the trigger, hitting another vampire in the chest as he ran in the front door. But Saklas still stood, totally unharmed. He unhinged his jaw and lunged forward, biting deeply into Stacy's neck. A hand fell down on my shoulder. I jumped, seeing Maria. Her eyes looked like a panicked animal's. In each hand, she held a grenade. "It's too late for us," she said, motioning to the smashed window. "My husband's dead. I will take these monsters out before I die, though. Now get out, run." I glanced back, seeing Stacy's blue lips and dilated pupils. I knew that she was dead, and I jumped through the window, landing hard in the yard. I had dropped the gun in the panic of the moment. As I sprinted across the yard, an explosion rocked the earth. I looked back, seeing a pillar of flame rising high into the sky. A shockwave seemed to travel through the air, rattling my bones and stealing my breath away. The eye of the flame danced higher, a swirling red cyclone that spiraled into the sky. I heard screaming from the house now. Many hissing, gurgling voices joined in as more vampires died in the inferno. I didn't know where to go. I stumbled through the dark streets for a long time, my head pounding. Tears streamed from my eyes as I thought about Stacy's death. After a few hours, I saw headlights streaming down the hills in the distance. It looked like a caravan of cars and SUVs were on their way into town. I started running towards them, hoping that the cavalry had finally arrived. I thought that I heard footsteps matching mine, but I glanced back, seeing nothing but shadows. Yet after another few seconds, I was sure of it. Someone was following me. I stopped, looked back. In the shadows on the side of the road, I saw 2 figures. One of them had metal teeth and glowing eyes. And next to him stood Stacy. Her wounds fully healed, her skin like stone. The light shone from both of their eyes now. The SUVs and cars sped toward me, their headlights parting the dark night. The 2 figures retreated back into the forest as dozens of government agents in black suits stepped out, rushing towards me. After seeing Stacy's ultimate fate, I thought back to earlier in the night when Maria had said, "There are, after all, worse things than death," and now I know she was right. I worked as a park ranger in northern Alaska for years, from when I was in my early 20s until my mid-30s. At first, when I took the job, I was trying to escape, but over time I learned to love it. The endless wilderness, the snow-capped mountains, the muffled way everything sounded during blizzards. With no light pollution, the stars up there looked like tiny chips of diamond. And during the winter, the northern lights roll in, twisting and shimmering in strange alien colors. But a few years ago, things got much worse. People up here have started to go missing at an alarming rate, and I started having strange experiences around the park and at the nature preserve. One of these strangest parts of my story started on a freezing dark night in 2018. I was on a snowmobile out in a terrible blizzard. The conditions were nearly to the point of being impassable. The snow was falling so thick and fast that it looked like a moving, shimmering wall of white on all sides of me. Another ranger, a huge, lumbering man named Ace Acosta, pulled up behind me on a second snowmobile. I looked at him, standing 6'6" with majestic peaks stretching up into the night sky, and thought about what a great picture this would make. As I was looking around, I saw the faint tracks in the snow. Ace's snowmobile lights were pointed in their direction, and I had been standing almost on top of them without realizing it, which is fairly easy to do when a few inches of snow were falling every hour. At first, I thought it was the frozen tracks of an injured animal. I saw the drops of blood soaked into the superficial ice first. Following their direction with my eyes, I realized that they were footprints pressed into the frozen crust, leading away from me and towards the flat stretch of the tundra. I squinted, getting down on my knees and leaning inwards. I didn't want to trample the tracks. I quickly realized that I was looking at human footprints, naked human footprints. But who would be out here in December in -40-degree winds without shoes? They would die rapidly out here. Just for me to drive across the tundra on a snowmobile required me to wear 3 jackets, long johns, snow pants, thick jeans, a ski mask, and multiple layers of socks and gloves with hand warmers. I wore special waterproof boots with composite toes that wouldn't freeze like steel toes. And despite all of this, I was still cold. I moved forward and saw handprints mixed in with the footprints, all of them bloody. The ice was thick enough to slice open human hands and feet undoubtedly. The logical conclusion was unshakable. Someone had crawled through here, maybe naked on all fours, and their frozen body would be somewhere up ahead. I sighed, turning to Acosta. He still stood in the same position, his face covered in a red scarf with only his eyes showing. I saw one ice-covered eyebrow raise questioningly. "I think we got us a body somewhere nearby," I said, getting back on my snowmobile and starting it. He did the same. "What kind of freaked-out tweaker would be walking around here without clothes on?" Ace asked in his deep baritone. "Man, I need a hit of whatever that guy's on. I've got 2 sweaters and 2 winter jackets on and I'm still cold." Kelton, what do you say?" He started elbowing me jokingly. I frowned, not responding. Ace always had a smart-aleck remark. He was next to me when I was interviewed for this job originally, down at the recruitment center in Washington State. The old lady doing the interviewing was a bloodless, angry-looking specimen of a woman, with huge glasses that magnified her eyes twice over. She spat out each question like a drill sergeant, talking to fresh meat in the army. "Are you a member of any organized religion?" she had asked brusquely. Ace shook his head. "No, ma'am, but I am a member of a disorganized religion," he said. "We call ourselves the servants of the old ones. We're waiting for the ancient reptilian gods at the bottom of the ocean to awaken. So far, however, they haven't responded to any of our texts." I thought about this as I revved the engine twice, a sign that I was about to pull off and that he should stay close. We took off, going slow and following the tracks as close as possible without destroying them. But they just kept on going, the bloodstains seeming to grow fainter as we moved forward. And strangely enough, the hand and footprints also started getting longer, as if someone were running on all fours and speeding up. We were nearing the beginning of the forest of evergreens when I saw a white flash just up ahead. The thing that ran from us was humanoid, but I knew at once that it was no person. It ran on hands and feet, totally naked, its skin a pale, lifeless white color. It turned its head towards the lights of these snowmobiles briefly. I saw a hairless creature with skin that clung tightly to its simian body, its lips permanently pulled back from its mouth as if they were eaten away. Underneath it showed mottled black and red gums covered in thick and clotted blood. Its nose appeared as little more than 2 irregular holes, and its eyes, they reflected the light of the snowmobiles, like the eyes of a raccoon or a possum. They were huge and sunken in its starving and monstrous face, and I saw what was leaving the bloody trails. The creature was, as far as I could tell, totally uninjured. In its permanently grinning mouth between rows of crooked, sharp, and blood-stained teeth, it held the body of an infant. The baby's head lolled from side to side, the neck seemingly broken, and blood dripped constantly from its mouth and nose. It had deep puncture marks in its tiny parka, half rings of teeth marks that must have broken its ribs. The blood stains on the snow were becoming fainter, because the heart was no longer pumping in the body of the one leaving them. I had a loaded rifle inside of my snowmobile, and I kept a 12-gauge shotgun slung around my back, mostly in case of bear or moose attack. I always kept the shotgun loaded with slugs, which were, in my experience, the most versatile ammunition for stopping any large animal. The 308 might take down a polar bear, at least with a good headshot, or it might just piss it off on a bad day. But a shotgun slug to the head or heart will stop any bear or moose in its tracks. Of course, this was no polar bear ahead of me. For all I knew, it was something far worse. I looked down at the speedometer to see that I was going 20 miles an hour, in the dark and in a blizzard. And yet this strange humanoid creature was still losing us, its seemingly never-ending store of energy still sending it forward at a superhuman speed. Its pale, bony legs and arms pumped back and forth so fast that they were just a blur. It kept its sharp teeth around the nape of the dead infant's neck, like a mother cat carrying its young. I kept one hand on the steering wheel while trying to free the strap of my shotgun over my head. I slowed down below 20 and the creature responded by going even faster. I was making a break for the mountain forest that started only a few hundred feet away. I got the gun free and quickly stopped the snowmobile and raised it. I centered the sights, taking a deep breath to steady myself, and I fired. I missed, though I don't know by how much. Shotguns had the drawback of being significantly less accurate at farther distances than the rifle. But by the time that I got the 308 out, I knew the creature would have long since disappeared in the thick brush and trees. By this point, Ace had also stopped and opened fire, but the creature had already gone. "Holy crap," Ace screamed. "That thing was fast. I can't believe he got away after all that." He heaved a deep sigh. "I think we better go find out where he got that baby from," I said. "We might have a lot more corpses on our hands than we realize." We found a radio in the snowmobile and messaged in what had happened, or at least the basic gist of it. I left out the part about the naked, half-human abomination, and said that it was an unknown animal. There wasn't much for law enforcement up in these parts because, there were barely any people. The rangers, as well as fish and wildlife agents, regularly worked with the police officers in small towns, at least those that had police officers. Dozens of the local tribal villages had no police at all. These people would come to forest agents and fish and wildlife agents most of all, and were always some of the county's friendliest and most helpful residents. By the time that we got back to the original blood-stained footprints, the snow had covered up the tracks completely. However, based on the direction that the creature had been going and where the tracks had come from, I thought that I knew where it might have started. Following the path in a nearly straight line led to the Lutna Peak trailer park. Ace and I drove off at max speed across the rolling hills and flat plains, the snow coming faster and heavier now. They say Eskimos have dozens of words for snow, and after being a ranger up here, I can say that I've seen every variation of it 1,000 times. This was turning into the kind that was wet with huge flakes and tended to stick to everything. We would probably have to find refuge soon, especially if it got any heavier. I heard the screaming before I saw the commotion. As we came around the sharp right turn where the dirt road turned into the trailer park, I saw dozens of people out, flitting like gnats around one of the trailers at the back corner of the park. All the lights were on in that particular trailer, and I saw one woman comforting another who was bent over and crying. Even though almost everybody knew us here, I pulled out my badge identifying me as a federal law enforcement officer. Up here, all the rangers were technically federal agents, allowed to carry guns and make arrests like typical police, except we were licensed under the Department of the Interior rather than under state law enforcement agencies. I ran into the trailer, and after one long glance around the place, I knew that there was no need to call for any ambulances. Ace followed close behind me, his heavy thudding footsteps shaking the trailer slightly as he ascended the steps. We said nothing for a long moment. The entire family was dead. There was blood everywhere, even spotting the ceilings. Most of it had frozen in the cold, and I wondered how long the door had been left open. Body parts were scattered across the floor, an arm in the corner of the room, a head standing up on the kitchen counter, even a random tooth embedded into the sheetrock. The savagery was brutal, and the amount of strength required to carry out such an attack must have been extraordinary. "I think we're going to need a lot more people on this than just you and me," Ace said. I nodded, already bone-tired, and with so much more work to do tonight before I could go to sleep. We found both state and federal authorities in the area. Since much of the land was tribally owned, we had to deal with multiple branches. Eventually, we got CSI out there in the middle of a snowstorm, though they had to come from over 3 hours away. We just secured the scene while we waited, constantly being brought into neighboring trailers where townsfolk would tell us the latest gossip. They also brought us hot coffee and tried to milk us for any information that we might have, as they usually did in such situations. "No, Maggie, honest," Ace was saying to one old lady wrapped up in an ancient fur coat. "I don't know any more about it than you do. You can be sure that you would know if I did." By that point, police cars were slowly pulling in one by one. Ace and I told them a simplified version of the night's events, said goodnight, and left the scene to them. I went home and took a scalding hot shower, trying to force the night's coldness out of my bones. And then I slept deeply, though I had nightmares of that creature's face turning to me, holding a dead baby in its mouth and marking me with its emotionless, reflective eyes. I didn't know it then, but that would be the last time that I would sleep in a bed for many days. The state police assigned us an officer the next day, stating that they wanted an official representative of their interests involved in the case. It was by this point a fairly high priority case. We didn't even have many assaults or robberies up here, less likely murders, and the murder of an entire family really stirred up the locals. The fact that the CSI techs couldn't make heads or tails of it made it even worse. They hadn't even agreed on whether it was done by humans or animals, or a combination of the two, like men with fighting dogs who went berserk. With no leads, they wanted us to go back to where we had seen the creature the previous night and to see what we could find. The police officer would be tagging us. A woman named Officer Melinda Jansen had the look of someone who had just started a new job and doesn't realize how terrible it is yet. She was all bright-eyed and bushy-tailed, and when she shook my hand, she nearly crushed the bones together under her iron grip. I saw Ace wince slightly when he shook her hand too. When she turned her back, she looked at me with one eyebrow raised as if he were saying, "What can you do?" It didn't take us long to find the spot from the previous night. When we got close to the forest where the creature had disappeared, I saw a branch that had been hit by a shotgun blast, and I knew that we were right on the money. In the daytime, I saw that there was a slight curving trail through the trees here, maybe an old deer trail. It was just wide enough for us to take our snowmobiles through if we went slow. Occasionally, I would have to get off being in the lead and move large branches that lay across the path, but overall it was faster going than I had expected. The trail followed across the top of a rolling hill, went down and then spiraled up around a mountain. We were high now, at least 7,000 feet above sea level, and the view went on for hundreds of miles. It was breathtaking, seeing the frozen white landscape below us, mountains lining one horizon and the Arctic Ocean on another. A couple hundred feet ahead of us, however, the trail just stopped. I saw an opening in the mountain, slowly bringing my snowmobile up. I looked into it and saw what looked like naturally formed stone hallways. The hall sloped down at a steep angle without stairs. An eerie silence radiated from the gradually thickening darkness. The other two snowmobiles cut out right behind mine, and Officer Jansen came walking up, flicking on her LED headlamp. Immediately, I saw a strip of light blue cloth. I walked forward, bending down to confirm what I had already suspected, that this was a piece of the missing infant's clothing. "That looks like more than enough cause to me. Let's do this," Jansen said. "I would like to be back before sundown." She kept walking without waiting for confirmation. Ace and I slung on our packs and turned on our headlamps. I tried using the radios and sat phone to share our location, but neither was working. The bright artificial lights showed that the natural stone walls of the hall just kept on descending into the mountain. A warm breeze blew past me, an acrid, sulfuric smell following in its wake. "This is just a body recovery mission at this point," I whispered to Ace, giving Officer Jansen a wide space so that I could talk. "So why are we potentially risking our lives here? We should be waiting for backup. We both know that that infant is dead. I mean, it has been for a while." "You know what I think?" Ace whispered conspiratorially, before a low shriek stopped us all in our tracks and ended conversation. I never did get to hear what he thought. By this point, it was much warmer than it had been outside, and I had the urge to start stripping off jackets. The shrieking had intensified, and it was now being answered by dozens of others that surrounded further away in the stone walls. Officer Jansen had pulled out her gun, which I saw with some astonishment was a .454 Ruger, a large caliber gun with good stopping power. I saw enough magazines strapped around her hips to decimate an entire herd of buffalo. I also pulled off my shotgun, making sure that it was filled with lead slugs. "Do you have any idea what we're up against?" I asked her. Ace was right behind us, his shotgun already cocked and loaded, the muzzle pointed downwards. I was sweating heavily by this point. The air in the tunnel just kept on getting warmer. It felt like I was walking into a sauna. Thin clouds of mist and droplets of hot condensation clung to these smooth granite ceilings. The hall continued to descend at the same steep rate, but now I could see something at the bottom. A light. "Not much more than you, really," Officer Jansen said with a slight sneer. "My only advice is to shoot first and ask questions later. Kill anything that moves. This place has taken a lot of people already. People who were too fat and slow to watch their own backs." I squinted as I examined the lights. They seemed to emanate from some sort of organism growing on the stone surface. It wasn't electrical lights, and it certainly wasn't natural sunlight. It glowed like the lights of millions of fireflies, a purplish blue color that painted the granite floors and walls in a totally different light. We were walking as quietly as possible by this point, but I still hadn't seen anyone. We reached the bottom of these stone halls, where strange mushrooms glowed in the darkness, their mycelium giving off that black-like color everywhere as it stretched across the threshold of the opening. I turned off my LED, seeing my comrades do the same, and then I poked my head through, looking back and forth. I saw more of those creatures from before, their lips missing, their skin pale, their eyes huge and rabid. They constantly twisted and snapped their heads to the left or right, as if hearing something only they could perceive. Two were dragging an elk that they had torn down the middle. Another was dragging an old man's body forward by the upraised legs. I saw the old man's missing head, his wrinkled hands trailing behind the body. I watched where all this activity was headed, and then I gasped. A huge insectile monster sat lazily against the stone wall as these creatures brought it meat. The monster was so fat that I wasn't even sure that it could stand up. It had a blood-red, chitinous exterior with a hood like a cobra's that extended around its head. Its teeth trembled together constantly as it shoved more offerings into its mouth, scenting blood gushing forward in thick clotted rivulets that dripped down its chin. Its long, thin arms had sharp knife-like digits, and its 6 legs branched like those of a praying mantis, splayed out on each side of its body, shining a dark red color in the strange light of the chamber. Its belly stretched far in front of its body, and with horror, I saw it drop a cluster of eggs, each as big as a dog. Their surfaces writhed and trembled, looking tight and ready to burst at any moment. The creatures that fed and cared for this monster rushed over, dragging the eggs to the corner of the warm chamber. I saw that there were dozens more of them over there, and that some had already hatched. Whatever that monster was, it had already given birth, and now those things were walking around, totally free to kill anything or anyone they wanted. This was the nightmare that took place years ago when I was a park ranger. I still remember standing there feeling disassociated and strange as I looked down on the eerie scene below us. "Oh God in heaven," Ace whispered in the purple light of the cave. Before us, the bright red hand shot forward and grabbed the body of the headless man. It lifted the corpse up with ease. I watched the beast open its jaw wide enough to throw the corpse in without difficulty. Snapping its mouth shut, it sprayed more red down its face and across the eroded stone floor in front of it. Dark red stains emanated across the floor from 20 feet in front of the creature, looking like clotted Rorschach ink blocks in the fetid cave. "We need to go deeper in," Jansen said, looking from me to Ace with a serious frown on her face. "You insane?" Ace said. "Do you want to die? There could be thousands of those things down there." But the decision was quickly taken out of our hands as we heard screaming, a young, high-pitched voice. We all looked down at once and saw the white humanoid mutants dragging out a young boy, one that I recognized from pictures on the trailer park crime scene wall. He had cuts and scrapes all over him and was shivering, either from hypothermia or fear or both, but he was alive. His eyes were huge as he was dragged forward by his small hands towards the great red insectile beast in the corner. "Dang it," I whispered, looking at Ace and Jansen. "Okay, Jansen and I will take point positions. Ace, you guard the rear. We will form a triangle and start shooting. When one reloads, the other two cover. Ace, you'll need to swing back and periodically check our backs to make sure that there's no ambush. Now, let's go." They didn't question my command. Neither of them had time to. To save the boy, we needed to move immediately. We started down these smooth stone floors, only a couple of 100 feet away from unknown numbers of enemies. I fired first, aiming my shotgun at the group of mutants nearest to me as quickly as I could pull the trigger. The first shot blew the chest of one open. I kept going and hit another in the leg, and ended up blowing chips of stone from the wall behind them. I saw it all in slow motion, my adrenaline pumping and the heightened awareness of battle taking hold. The second shot hit the nearest one in the head. It exploded like a shattering vase, bits of blood and bone flying out in all directions. I saw the one holding the boy drop as Jansen hit it with a shot from the Ruger. It was an amazing shot, missing the boy entirely and taking off the head of the creature. It looked fairly risky, especially with the pistol, but I could tell that she had experience and marksmanship. And yet personally, I never would have tried from that distance with a hostage in tow, with anything less than a rifle. The chance of blowing the hostage's head off seemed far too great. It made me wonder about her impulse control and risk-taking mindset. Who was this woman after all? The white mutant continued holding the boy's hand for a second, standing on its feet as its mutilated half-destroyed head kept pumping sprays of red in the air. And then it fell, crumpling slowly to the floor. The black beast in the corner appeared enraged by this point. It gave off a banshee wail that sent out powerful blasts of sound, rising and falling in distinct waves. It sounded like a choked, much deeper version of a steam whistle. Instinctually, I wanted to drop my gun and cover my ears to stop the painful shrieking. It seemed even louder than the gunshots, something that I would have said was impossible before hearing it. And worse than all that, the beast was rising to its feet. While it looked fat and slow, and while I knew it to be full of eggs since we had seen it lay some, it turned out to be much faster than all of us would have expected. It had a huge, blood-red belly, but it moved with the grace and speed of a cat. It rose on its 6 legs, its upper body sticking up from the lower insectile carapace like some sort of demented centaur. Its branched legs skittered forward in a centipede-like motion that gave me an instinctive revulsion. But it wasn't running towards us. It was moving away from the gunfire towards a huge entrance. As it went, it grabbed the boy with its inhumanly long and thin arms. I feared that it would open its giant maw and pop him inside, and that would be the last that we would ever see of him. But it didn't. It disappeared, making that shrieking, steam whistle cry as it went. My ears were ringing so badly from all the gunshots, the echoes of the gunshots and the cries of the beast, that I was afraid that I had gone deaf for a moment. Ace stood in front of me, moving his lips, but I couldn't tell what he was saying. "What?" I screamed. My hearing slowly returned. "We have to follow the boy," he said. "We can't lose his trail." I knew that he was right. The existence of a live hostage had totally changed the situation. We had no backup coming and no way to call for help. We would have to take him ourselves. It seemed an insane proposition, and the creatures here vastly outnumbered us, but letting a hostage die was not an option. Yeah, no crap, I said gloomily. I sighed deeply. We had more ammo in the snowmobiles. I had filled my pockets with extra slugs, but I hadn't expected this. Ace was likely in a similar situation. We faced the choice of either going back and trying to grab as much ammo as we could, and possibly losing the hostage, or going forward and running the risk of using up all of our ammo, which was, after all, a risk either way, since we had no idea how many of those things lived in the tunnels. I saw the same thoughts running through Ace's mind as he looked back toward these snowmobiles and then forward to the tunnels. Let's go, I said, motioning for us to go forward. We can't risk losing the trail. We'll put breadcrumbs down as we go, metaphorically. Slice off tiny pieces of a jacket or something so that we can find our way back. Based on how many of those things I saw, he responded, I think we'll be able to just follow the empty shell casings alone. Jansen had already started running forward by this point, and we had to sprint to keep up. We ran past the eggs, some empty and others throbbing with inner life. I saw the one nearest to me pulsating with blood-red veins, a thin, luminous skin revealing the silhouette of a monstrous insectoid creature inside. It writhed and squirmed, twisting its 6 legs and pushing against the membrane that kept it entombed within the egg from time to time. Soon I knew that it would push through. How many others had already hatched? How long had this been going on? I had a feeling that we would soon find out. We sprinted into the tunnel, turning on our LED headlamps as we went. Jansen was in the lead and then Ace, and then me at the rear. Periodically I checked our backs, but nothing seemed to be following us. Not yet anyways. All the commotion was in front of us. That creature was still shrieking, though the sound was much more muffled and distant now. To my horror, I heard dozens of responses from all around, deeper in various tunnels that branched off from the main chamber or from this one. Some sounded very far away and barely audible, but others seemed much, much closer. I also heard the cries for help from the young boy, though these too grew fainter. We tried running faster, but what could a human's 2 legs do against that skittering monstrosity's 6 legs? Not much, I thought to myself. The tunnel looked empty. That strange mold grew everywhere here as well. We barely even needed the LEDs to see, though it had so many curves and branches that it was difficult to see far anyways. Every 100 feet or so another wall appeared, always curving to the left or to the right. As we ran, I saw glimmers of what looked like red eyes from some of these smaller side tunnels, but whenever I turned to look, they were gone. It was the same with those who might have followed us. I thought that I saw glimpses of a long white hand or a lipless face for a moment, but when I pointed the gun, the thing had slunk back into the shadows or deeper into one of the endless branching tunnels that disappeared around corners in an instant. The shrieking of the beast had faded into the distance, and an eerie silence descended like a fog. We had all stopped by this point at an intersection of the cave system. One tunnel went off to the left at a right angle, the other to the right at a right angle, and then we had the larger main tunnel that we were following that extended in front of and behind us. Luckily, we hadn't yet deviated from the main tunnel, so finding our way back should be relatively easy. It felt substantially hotter down here as well. We had descended deeper into the chain of mountains that ran northwards, parallel to the Arctic Ocean. I had opened all of my jackets and taken off my hat, but still felt boiling hot. I could tell that the other 2 did as well. Trickles of sweat beaded their faces and they were ripping off layers of clothing. They threw a couple jackets on the ground, not wanting to carry them for God knows how long. If we made it out of here, I thought that they might regret it. But after miles of walking, I too threw a couple jackets on the ground and left them. After all, when we came back this way to return to the snowmobile, we could just grab them again. Except, of course, we never did come back that way. God dang, Ace said. Well, we've lost the kid. Let's go back and report. We should be able to find a signal with the sat phone somewhere in the area. I wish that we had, but at that moment, circumstances beyond our control sealed our fate. It started with a small tremble, almost imperceptible. I looked around at the glowing purplish walls and the strange mossy molds that covered everything. Some of them lost connection with the walls as the shaking grew stronger. As soon as their root system stopped touching the stone and earth, the round cluster of detached mold would instantly go dark. Their black light illumination shut off like a switch when it stopped being anchored to the stone tunnel. Earthquake, I shouted, but Jansen and Ace clearly already knew. We looked around for someplace safe. We ducked into a side tunnel where the ground was more stable. Behind us, rocks smashed into the ground, knocked out of place after who knows how many years. It became a continuous cacophony. We ran faster and finally something behind us seemed to let go. The entire main tunnel sounded like it was collapsing. Some small pebbles and rocks dislodged and hit me in the face and chest as I ran, but it became increasingly clear that whatever fault line had slipped had been further back, running underneath the main northwards tunnel. It sounded like tons of dirt and stone had collapsed, and then as suddenly as it had started, it stopped. A few small aftershocks shook the area slightly, but as a whole it seemed like we were safe. We all had our LED headlamps on as we made our way back to the main tunnel, hoping that there was a way out. We had to get to the snowmobiles and more importantly, we needed help. There might be more people imprisoned or taken hostage down here for all I knew. Is everyone okay? I said. Fine, Jansen said, wiping dirt off her face. A small trickle of blood ran down her forehead. Jesus, the main tunnel, Ace said, walking slowly out of the small tunnel that we had sought refuge in. Look at it. I came up behind him, unsurprised to see tons of rock spilling out towards us, with smaller boulders and pebbles nearest, and huge pieces as tall as a man appearing further in. We're going to need to find another way back, I said. We can't go back, Jansen said. There's a hostage in here. And how do you expect us to find him? Ace asked. These tunnels could go for 100 miles in every direction for all we know. I felt another tremble below our feet as a small aftershock passed through the area, sending a few smaller stones rolling and tumbling around us. But we had come this far after all. We're going to get that kid back, I said. We've already come this far and the way back is blocked anyways. We're going to need to find another way out. There has to be other entrances to this cave system. But what I really thought about was the horror stories that I had heard about the Paris catacombs. How occasionally somebody would find themselves lost in them. Countless random twists and turns through the darkness below the city, combined with many miles of tunnels, meant that very few who found themselves alone and lost down there made it back. They often starved or died from dehydration, their bones inevitably mixing with the hundreds of thousands of others, resting eternally under the bustling cityscape above. After resting, we started moving forward together. Morale felt low and even Ace looked sullen and thoughtful. We continued on in the main tunnel, hoping that the boys still lived somewhere in these endless tunnels. But we hadn't heard a single sound from the creatures in so long that I began to give up hope. The tunnel ahead of us started to open up, and massive growths of the luminescent molds began infesting the floor and walls, growing in shapes like ant mounds that reached nearly up to my neck. A soft sound began to echo back. It sounded like the babbling of a subterranean brook. Running forward, I shone the light into the stream and felt relieved to see that it was full of pure and clean water. I began to greedily shove handfuls of water into my mouth. I saw Ace and Jansen follow my lead. After all the running and fighting, I felt hungry, thirsty, and tired. Looking up, I saw there was a primitive bridge against the stream, made of a slab of granite, and beyond I saw something that took my breath away. There was a cathedral down here, or at least something close to it. Hundreds of eggs stretched across the right and left sides of the chamber, like pews in a church. They were organized in lines with a 10-foot wide empty path leading further in. Hundreds of feet above us, sharp stalactites hung from the ceiling, glowing in the purplish light of the mold who climbed the walls in thin streamers. At the end of the open chamber, a few hundred feet away, I saw a carving that stretched to the ceiling. Hewn from pure stone, it showed one of those insectile, egg-laying monsters. It showed it standing up straight with its thin, branching arms stretched out to the ceiling above it. Its oval eyes, wide and its huge mouth, stretched open wide to show its countless predator's teeth. Below it, I saw one of the white humanoid creatures. This one wore a coarse brown robe, the first one of its kind that I had ever seen clothed. It was so still that I thought it was part of the carving at first, that they had created a religious icon showing these creatures serving their great and horrible masters. But then it turned toward us. We all raised our guns at once. "Freeze!" Jansen cried. I saw her finger tightened around the trigger. "Don't," I said. "It's unarmed. Wait." I felt eyes on me from all around me, but when I turned to check our backs, I saw nothing. We started walking forward towards the robed mutant. As we got closer to the front, I saw more and more of the eggs appeared empty. The ones in the back all had life inside. Life that pushed against the thin membranes and whose legs skittered eerily in the amniotic fluid that they breathed. "Why should we let it live?" Jansen objected angrily under her breath as we moved forward in unison. "These things killed that family, and who knows how many others." When I think back to all the unsolved missing persons cases in this county, I knew what she meant. The same thought had occurred to me. How many people had these creatures killed? The mutant in the brown robe stood there, his lipless mouth forming a cold sneer as he looked me up and down. Its strange eyes seemed to bulge from its emaciated face. When I got close enough, I realized that they had almost an albino look to them, with blood-red irises that faded towards pink as they neared the center. The pupils seemed to glow, reflecting the eerie light of the mold. I didn't know what to do next. The creature in front of me spoke first, however. "They are our gods," he croaked. From the depth of his voice and the cast of his body, I had figured out that this was probably a male among his species. The way he spoke reminded me of how deaf people sometimes sounded when they spoke. The words sounded strange with random pauses and changes in cadence, making it hard to understand at times, but it was definitely English. "Who are you?" I asked. "What is this place?" He shook his head, pointing to the huge carving behind him. "Gods," he said. "We feed, and they protect." "Well, they haven't done a very good job so far," Ace whispered in my ear. "Those huge bugs just ran screaming when we started shooting." I ignored this. "What are you?" I asked, hoping for an actual response, and this time I got one. "We are the Keepers," he said slowly, thoughtfully, looking up at the huge carving. "And these are necrovores." He shook his head again, an expression crossing his face that looked very human. Was it regret, fear? "And they're hungry, so hungry." As if on cue, I heard the skittering of many legs behind me. Spinning around quickly, I saw that while we had been distracted, some of what he called the necrovores had surrounded us in a semicircle, cutting off any retreat. They looked much smaller than the original one that we had seen, and I assumed that they were likely juveniles. "Behind you!" I screamed to my team. but they had already heard what I had. I raised my shotgun, firing a slug into the nearest one's curved red face. It went between its eyes, and for a moment, I could see a clear hole all the way through behind it to the stone walls surrounding us. And then it crumpled, its legs shaking spasmodically in its death throes, its arms moving back and forth in small arcs quickly, as if it had a seizure in its last dying moments. Dozens of them appeared, and the speed at which they ran at us looked eerie. All I would see was a red blur and the flash of many branching legs, and an instant later, I would see one of those abominations flying through the air, with jaws opened and claws raised forwards. The guns fired quickly, dropping a dozen in the space of a few seconds, and slowing the ones behind it enough for us to have a chance. But they skittered so fast, like huge spiders. Their many legs shuffled and cracked against the stone floors, and they leapt at us. I dodged one, sidestepping it and shooting it in the head with a shotgun blast. Its dark red eyes looked at me from its angular face, as a giant exit wound exploded from the back of its mouth. Shrieking, it fell. Ace wasn't so lucky. One jumped at him, slashing with its sharp claws and unhinging its jaw. In a blur, I saw it grab his left arm, slicing through the cloth and skin easily. A spray of blood shot into the air. "Ace, no!" I screamed, chambering another round and firing. I hit the beast in the center of its body. It gurgled and spit as blood poured out of it. It tried to get up and keep fighting, but its legs gave out underneath it, and I watched it for a moment as it lay on the floor, kicking and dying. Ace had reloaded and turned, taking down another one with a direct shot. Jensen dropped the last two, and then suddenly everything was quiet again. Only the ringing in my ears from all the gunfire broke it. I ran over to Ace, looking at his arm. He winced, pulling back his sleeve. I saw a deep gouge mark, the slice cutting nearly to the bone. Blood spurted out in time with his heartbeat, but it didn't look like any arteries had been severed. We quickly applied pressure and a tourniquet, and after many minutes of resting and attending to his wound, the bleeding had slowed. We sat among all the dead and necrovores. The strange priest had disappeared in the fighting, slinking away in one of the tunnels behind the carving. "We need to find food and water," I said. "There may be more underground streams if we're lucky, but food? What are we going to do, cook a necrovore?" I looked at the corpse of the nearest one disdainfully as I spoke. "If we have to," Jensen said. "I'm not dying down here, not unless I have to." "That's funny," Ace said, looking at his injured arm. "Because you were the one who acted all gung-ho to come down here in the first place, even before we saw the boy, who, by the way, we have seen no sign of. This has all been a wild goose chase, an insane wild goose chase to God knows where, and probably death, or the seventh circle of the nether, maybe," I said jokingly, but no one smiled. We continued walking. Eventually, we heard a soft babbling and found a small stream running through a side tunnel. We cleaned Ace's wound as best as we could, drinking as much of the clean, clear water as possible. But hunger began affecting me. I wonder if we really would have to try eating those strange red beasts if it came down to it. Maybe they would taste like lobster, I thought to myself with a smile. But our problems only got worse from there. Ace's wound looked terrible. Red inflamed patches of skin rose all around the slice, and the veins seemed to be discolored as they led away from it. "Oh, nothing to worry about," Ace smiled. "It's only a flesh wound." But in fact, I did worry, and it got worse as we went on. After a couple more hours of walking, it started to really smell, and I saw pus and black spots beginning to spread on his arm. I had never seen an infection set in so rapidly and spread so quickly before. I wondered what kind of exotic, alien bacteria might be on those creatures, and I shuddered. We rested, finding an empty side of the tunnel and laying down. Ace and I were far away from Jansen, who had wandered away down the tunnel a few hundred feet, maybe to use the bathroom in private. "I don't trust her," Ace whispered. "Yeah, neither do I. I think she knows more than she lets on." "The whole thing seems weird," Ace said, looking down at his arm for the 100th time, frowning and wincing. "But I think that you might find you need her. I'm certainly not in much of a condition to help you." After resting for a while, we got back up and started on down the tunnel again, the endless growths of mold still giving us enough illumination to see ahead without our headlamps. I tried to conserve the battery as much as possible. Ace quickly grew so sick that he staggered, bending over and retching occasionally. Sweat poured down his forehead, and he swayed on his feet whenever he stood up straight. I looked at his wound and I gasped. I thought about the medical terms that I had heard. Suppuration, the wound discharging pus, draining the fluids of dying tissue and leaking it all over his skin. Necrosis, the living flesh being eaten as the man watches. None of these words covered the true horrors of what we saw. Ace walked for as long as he could, but as he went on, I could smell the wound more and more. Soon it became all that I could smell. It was nauseating, like raw meat rotting on a wet summer day combined with a strange, fetid, bacterial odor. It drove me crazy and made me want to vomit. I couldn't imagine what Ace felt in those last dark hours. I had once seen a movie called Requiem for a Dream where the addict's arm had gotten infected. Streaks of black and purple spread across his skin, leading back to his heart. The central point of the infection rotting and spreading throughout the body as he watched it eat him alive. I had never seen anything like it, at least until this moment. Looking at the wound on his arm, the red inflamed veins bulging out, the black rotting skin in the center, the flesh separating and falling off. It tore at the limits of my sanity. I had to look away, but when I closed my eyes, I still saw it. And I always smelled it. "I'm dying," he said. "We'll get you help," I said, not believing it. He shook his head. "I can't do this anymore. I can't take that smell. The smell of my body decaying. I can feel my skin separating. I can feel the pus running out. I can feel my body rotting from the inside. I can see it." He began to cry. "Just go. Leave me with the shotgun and one slug. I'm not going on. I can't take it anymore." No, I started to say, but Jansen interrupted. "He's right. He's dying, and even if we had medical attention at this point, I don't know if they could save him. The sepsis has spread him. The limbs need to be amputated. But we have no antibiotics and not even a single capsule of penicillin. He needs immediate, intravenous antibiotics to have any chance." "Now leave me the gun," he said, and I did. I dropped the shotgun next to him, putting a lead slug carefully on the ground next to it. He laid down, his face pale and sweaty, his eyes wide and terrified. "Now go, you shouldn't have to see this." "You don't have to do this," I said, making one last feeble attempt to change his mind, but he shook his head. "I'm not afraid of dying, old friend. I'm not afraid of doing it myself. I know some of those freaks say that it ruins your eternal soul or whatever, but I think we both know an infinite God, if he exists, probably doesn't give a crap. Every man owes a death after all, and we'll all get there somehow. But at least I took down a lot of those necrovores in the end. Maybe that'll be enough to give me entrance into Valhalla. Do you think?" I felt a tear creeping down my cheek. Blinking quickly, I brushed the tears away. "I think you'll have a front row seat in Valhalla, Ace. Save me a seat. Take care," I said, knowing that he could do nothing of the sort. Turning sadly, we walked away. And as Jansen and I went down the tunnel, I heard a single shot of a shotgun blast echoing from behind us. "He's gone," I said slowly and sadly, the sound of the gunshot ringing through my head. Jansen shook her head as if clearing it. "We need to get out of here," she said, "or we'll be joining him. We have no food, no guaranteed access to water, no medical treatment. We'll probably starve. But if anything happens, we might die much faster." I sighed. My stomach churned and felt tight. I was so hungry that it hurt. A dull pain arose in my midsection, a constant reminder that I hadn't eaten a meal in far too long. Starvation, I knew, could take at least a few weeks, especially if the person had some body fat and muscle before they began. And yet, with us walking dozens of miles beneath the earth in these caves, that optimistic projection of a few weeks until dying from starvation narrowed to significantly less. Just as bad and perhaps worse, I had run low on ammo. I felt in my pocket for more shotgun slugs. I counted 17 left. I would keep one for myself in case I were facing some horrible slow death and needed a way out. This meant that when we were inevitably attacked, I only had 16 shots that I could fire. These problems circled around my head over and over as we walked. Jansen spoke little. Her breathing sounded heavy and her posture looked much more slumped than the gung-ho, straight-backed woman that I had first met. It looked to me like she was giving up hope. I tried to cheer her up. "There must be dozens of exits in this place," I said. "Think about it. Those white mutant humanoid things, the Keepers, they're feeding those huge red beasts which they call the necrovores, right? At least they're feeding them sometimes. I have a feeling that the necrovores could easily hunt for themselves. They're a clear apex predator. Perhaps the Keepers just want to keep them secret, though." "Get to the point," Jensen said. "What about the exits? We have seen exactly one exit and entrance to this place." "Okay," I said. "The Keepers have to be bringing in meat from multiple openings. It wouldn't make sense for them to just have one opening, the one that we came in, and then walk hundreds of miles under the ground. They presumably try to feed the necrovores in this stretch of tunnel as well, so they must be going up and out, hunting or stealing food or whatever, bringing it back. So, you're saying that if we can find one and follow it, then maybe," Jensen began. But her words were cut off quickly as a shriek came from behind us. I spun, raising my already loaded gun and snapping the safety off. The sleek black Benelli shotgun felt like an extension of my body by this point, until I ran out of bullets that was, and it became just an inexpensive metal club. Jansen reacted as fast as myself, snapping on an LED light to give us more illumination. The white light shot out, blinding me for a moment. In comparison to the dull, purplish light of the fungus that grew on the sides and walls of the tunnels, it looked like the sun itself. A massive red blur disappeared down the hall from behind us, its eerie cry reminiscent of a steam whistle receding with it. I looked around for more signs that we were being followed and stalked, but it looked empty behind us. We kept moving forwards, and the main tunnel had ended, splitting into left and right corridors both the same size and without any indication of which one to take. By this point, I had given up any hope of seeing the kidnapped boy again. I wasn't even sure that I would survive. We went left and further up the tunnel split again. We went left again, and eventually, I smelled something new. Roasting meat. My stomach immediately began to flip and ache as the scent wafted through the tunnel. "I smell food," I said quietly, trying to keep the excitement out of my voice. "Food, meat, oh thank God." We walked forward side by side, going faster by this point. Even Jansen's eyes gleamed. "I'm so hungry. I could eat one of those necrovores," she said. "I bet they taste like chicken." "They look more like lobsters," I said. "Nice and red with a thick shell. I bet if you boiled them and got a little melted butter." Suddenly, I found the tunnel blocked by a necrovore. I instinctively jumped and raised my gun, almost firing straight into it. And then I saw that it had a bullet through the center of its chest. It looked dead, laying on its back with dark red eyes staring up at the ceiling. its branching insectile legs curled up in a pathetic way, like a desiccated house spider. "What the heck?" Jansen asked, her expression twisting into confusion. "Who shot this one? You?" I shrugged. "Well, it had to be one of us," I said. "Perhaps the last time they attacked us, one of us hit one in the stomach and it ran off. Then once it got here, it finished dying from blood loss or organ failure, or whatever took it out in the end. That would be my guess." Jansen had knelt beside the corpse of the necrovore, moving one of its stiff legs aside to get closer to its open mouth, full of hundreds of sharp teeth. I saw her feeling around for something in her pocket. "I have to use the bathroom," I lied, now curious as to what kind of scheme Jansen was up to. I had had a feeling ever since I first met her that there was something more to her being here than just a state cop wanting to tag along with rangers. I walked down the tunnel, and when it began to curve, I pretended to move against the wall and start urinating, but I was watching Jansen. She reached into her inner coat pocket and took out a clear glass vial with a black top. Kneeling down in front of the necrovore, I saw her dip the vial in its mouth, presumably to collect some of its bloody saliva, and then screw on the top. I started walking back, and she quickly tucked the vial back into her inner coat pocket. Jansen quickly backed up a couple steps from the necrovore, changing her facial expression into the pale, indifferent look that she had worn for what felt like days now. But the real Jansen was under there. I had seen it, and she was up to something. I debated bringing up what I had seen, confronting her directly, but I decided against it. I would confront her when the time was right, but for now, survival seemed more important. We left the necrovore behind and began to go down the tunnel, towards the delicious smells of roasting meat that had grown much stronger now. Up ahead, I saw a ray of light shining into the cave. My heart soared. It was real sunlight, and that meant only one thing: an exit. I was going to run up ahead when I heard Jansen click the safety off her gun, cock the hammer, and tell me 2 words. "Don't move." She was only a few feet behind me. I still had my shotgun strapped around my shoulder, and I was looking forward, away from her. She had all the advantages. I knew that most likely I was doomed and I would die right here, on the floor of a cave without my family ever knowing what happened. "Take your shotgun and drop it on the floor slowly," Jansen said. "If you turn, I will shoot you." I did as she asked. "Keep looking away from me." Now, I saw your expression when you first saw the necrovores at the entrances of the cave, and you didn't even look the slightest bit surprised. So I'm going to ask you one question and one question only. Have you seen them before? "Yes," I said softly, remembering. About half a year before the events with Ace and Jansen in the cave, I had been alone in my log cabin. I made a full pot of coffee, cleaned and oiled my guns, and decided to go shooting. After pouring a huge thermos of boiling hot coffee, I grabbed my Winchester 30-30, a beautiful gun with a polished walnut stock. I headed outside, setting up targets to shoot. I had gone to the dump and grabbed an old air conditioner and a metal trash lid, and I set these up at different distances. And because it was summer, the air smelled fresh and clean. The nighttime had come, and with no pollution and no clouds, all the stars in the sky seemed to radiate a bright and pure light. It seemed as if blue flames shot out of my gun for a split second when I fired in the darkness. I would instantly hear the ping of metal as it connected with one of my targets. I had gone on this way for a while when the crying and shrieking had started from the woods nearby. No one lived near me, so I instantly went on high alert. For a few seconds, I tried to convince myself that it was just a fox or a fisher cat, but I had heard both and it sounded different. This seemed much louder and almost synthetic. I reloaded my gun, stuffing an extra clip into my pocket, and I began to follow the sounds. And then I heard a gunshot, and then 2, and the screaming grew louder. I sprinted ahead, dodging roots and rocks, moving between the evergreen and birch trees growing thick in this part of the forest. The insects had mostly fallen silent after the gunshots, and the wilderness had an eerie, silent quality to it now, as if everything in these woods were staying quiet so that they could hear what happens next. And then I caught glimpses of them. 2 men and a red insectile beast that stood over 8 feet tall. The men looked panicked and certainly had no sharpshooting skills. They had emptied their clips from the look of it, but I only saw a couple small trails of blood on the insectoid creature, namely from shallow grooves that ran over the side of its chest and above one shoulder. It moved forward in a rage and used its razor-sharp fingers to slit the nearest man's throat, and then it moved on to the next man. I was running as fast as I could, trying to get within range to save the man's life. In horror, I watched the beast jerk its head forward, its mouth opening wide as its jaw disengaged, and it bit off the surviving man's legs at the knees. I screamed, "No!" and stopped running, looking through the sight and opening fire. I hit the red creature a few times in the head, right between its dark and staring eyes, and after a few seconds of screaming, it fell back. I ran forwards, going to the injured man and shaking him. "What was that?" I yelled at him. "Who are you? What are you doing?" He shook his head slowly as if trying to clear it, and then he looked up at me. "My name is Constantine," he said in a thick accent. "I'm an agent for the SFB, an agent for my home country of Russia. I would not normally tell you this, but I'm dying. That creature," he pointed at the huge red thing lying dead on the ground. "It has a bacteria in its body that has immense potential as a biological warfare agent. It can cause septic shock in a human, and most antibiotics have no effect. A millionth of a drop of what that creature has could kill a man, and when the post-mortem is done, it will look just like a runaway bacterial infection, something that anybody could get." "Thanks," I said, putting a bullet into his head, and then I buried the 2 agents and the red creature in a single mass grave. The soft Alaskan soil covered them all quickly. No one would have access to any biological weapons from these creatures while I was alive, not if I could help it. I told all of this to Jansen, if that was her real name, trying to kill as much time as possible. My only hope was for some deus ex machina, some sort of fortuitous savior who could stop her, because in my heart I knew that she would not let me live. No more than the Russian agents would have let me live if they had succeeded in killing the necrovore and knew that I had seen. Jansen went pale, her face turning into a deep scowl, and then she added, "So the Russians somehow heard about the necrovores," she said to herself, "and now they want to take samples just like us." "Who are you really with?" I asked. "I know you're not a cop." "I'm CIA," she said, smiling wide. "I really do feel bad about this, but orders are orders. I was explicitly told that no witnesses could survive. The CIA wishes to take some necrovores alive and see if they can be used as biological weapons in themselves, if released in an enemy country, for instance. But for now, even just the extremely powerful bacterium is enough. Goodbye, and I'm sorry." I closed my eyes, breathing fast. My time was up. I knew that I would die now, shot in the back like a common criminal. But no shot came. Instead, I heard a surprised grunt of pain and then a horrible gurgling, spitting sound had started. I turned my head slowly, wondering if this was some sort of trick, and then I saw it. Jansen stood with her throat cut, a fountain of blood pouring down the front of her clothes. Her eyes looked amazed and surprised, as if she had just seen the world's greatest magic trick. And then she fell, her body landing hard on the stone floor of the tunnel. Behind her, I saw Ace, his bloody folding knife held tightly in one trembling hand. His other hand looked black and dead, the fingers twisted strangely. "Oh my God, Ace!" I yelled in shock and bliss. "I thought you were dead." Soon," he said, falling himself on top of Jansen's body. I ran over to him, the smell of the rotting meat of his arm covering the entire area, but I was so happy that I could hug him. "How?" I asked Ace. He looked up at me, his eyes watering and unfocused, and then he vomited up a stream of watered-down blood. It fell on the hand of Jansen. "I was attacked," Ace said. "That one single slug. I had to use it to shoot a necrovore that tried to ambush me immediately after you guys left. And then someone started cooking and I smelled meat. I had made my way slowly in the direction of the smell, and I found one of the white mutants roasting a deer on fire. They had stores of food in one room, mushrooms, ferns, meat, and nuts, and it was huge. I hid behind a pile of deer skins eating as much as I could, waiting to die and sipping some water that trickled down from the ceiling. And then I heard you and Jansen nearby. Your voices echoed and you scared away the white mutant, the keeper who was cooking. I heard Jansen's confession and I killed her." He pointed to his arm. The black and purple rod had spread past his shoulder and began to eat into his chest. "I'm almost done. Almost done. Will you give me peace? Will you do the coup de grace?" I nodded, putting a slug in the chamber. Ace looked up at me, his eyes tearing up, his face reflecting the sadness and uncertainty deep within him. "I'll tell everyone of your bravery, old friend," I said, pointing the gun at his forehead and pulling the trigger. There was a splash and then I was alone. I took all the ammo and the guns off Jansen, which gave me 19 rounds for the Ruger, and then I began to walk towards the sunlight that I still saw streaming across the hallway, praying for an exit. I turned into the room and saw what Ace had seen. A deer roasted over a dying fire, a pile of edible mushrooms on a deer skin in the corner, a pile of fiddleheads next to it, and a variety of edible herbs from the forest on the other side. Some dried, jerky-like meat also lay on a huge, flat rock under the sun. I saw with horrifying disappointment that the light came from a small hole in the ceiling, one where the smoke from the fire could escape. There was no way to get up there unless I could transform into a spider, and the hole seemed too small to crawl through anyway, but it still gave me hope. It meant that I wasn't thousands of feet below the ground and that a real exit might be right around the corner. If only there weren't so many branching caverns to get lost in, I thought. I ate well and then took a deer skin and began to wrap up as much food as I could carry. It was undoubtedly the best meal of my life. After starving in the darkness for so long, even the most tasteless food seemed like ambrosia. I tied the deer skin to a long stick, like a hobo going off to a train, and balancing it on my shoulder went off of myself. I wandered for weeks, eating as little as I could from the food. I found another kitchen in which the keepers stored food on the second week, with elk meat and more dried mushrooms stored there, and I took what I could. Cold mountain streams flowed through the caves periodically, giving me water to drink, and yet I found no exit, and though I caught glimpses of white hands or red shells behind me, the enemy seemed happy to simply stalk me and watch, until I neared the end that was. It came suddenly, a huge archway up ahead past a bend in the cavern. Because it was night, I didn't even realize at first what I saw. But the light of the moon looked so different from the dull and purplish light of the mold that I realized with ecstasy that I must be close to the end of this eternal cave. I started to run, and that was when the ambush was sprung. They came from everywhere. Keepers in coarse brown robes and flashes of red from the necrovores surrounding me. The necrovores spat and hissed while the keepers rambled in their strange, high-pitched, yammering language. I dropped my remaining food on the ground, seeing it spill on the floor in slow motion as my adrenaline spiked. Then in a blur, I had the Ruger 454 in my hand. I ran toward the door, emptying all 6 rounds at those necrovores closest to me. I aimed for their dark red eyes, a technique which had worked well in previous battles. I tried to clog the tunnel with the corpses of those nearest, but the smaller ones behind writhed and wriggled past the twisted, bleeding bodies of their siblings. I was almost to an exit, however. I could feel the fresh air by this point. I felt hands grabbing at me from behind, grabbing the Ruger. I began to pistol whip anything and everything near, eventually feeling the hands release after a couple of seconds. One of them grabbed at the pistol and it fell to the floor. I had no time to pick it up. Now I had necrovores on each side of me, and they moved in a blur, their legs skittering forwards as their bodies twisted from side to side in hungry anticipation. Their mouths opened wide and their claws began to whip through the air as I grabbed the shotgun, opening fire. The first one I blew off its hand. It shrieked, looking down as blood pumped out of the stump, and then began to backpedal, knocking the necrovore behind it down. The second one jumped straight at me, its huge maw opened wide. I could see down its sleek, wet throat. It aimed at my face and I began to shoot blindly, hitting its open mouth 3 or 4 times. It fell to the floor a few inches from me, and I heard it click as the shotgun ran out of ammo. As I ran, I put my last bullets in the shotgun, shooting behind me and hitting a couple of those who would kill me. I felt in my pocket and realized that I was now down to 2 bullets. I sprinted through the exit, grabbing for the very last rounds. I saw those creatures coming through the stone door and after slamming a slug in the chamber, dropped a large necrovore at the threshold. It fell noiselessly, blocking the door to those behind him, and I ran. I ran for what felt like hours, until I saw a small curl of smoke up ahead. I found a small Eskimo village on the coastline. An elderly woman in a little shack opened the door. Somebody in the town had a ham radio, which they used to call for help and get me evacuated. When I first got back and saw myself in the mirror, I was horrified. I had lost many pounds and looked thin and frail, my cheekbones sharp and angular. My haunted eyes sunk in deep into my skeletal face. I could count every rib on my chest, and my legs looked like sticks covered in skin. I didn't tell my boss the whole story, or anyone else for that matter. I had been missing for weeks and mostly said that I got lost in the tunnels when looking for a missing boy, which was true to an extent. I did not tell them about the necrovores, however, or the brave actions of Ace that saved my life. That was a story I kept to myself, until now.